The wind does not remember the lines drawn on maps, it only knows how to find the cracks in a cold window pane. Imagine a city settling into twilight. The great storm that had torn the world apart has finally quieted, leaving behind a silence that does not feel like peace. It feels, instead, like the heavy, gray stillness of a winter sky just before the snow begins to fall. The thunder has stopped, the earth has stopped shaking, but the people who walk these winding streets are carrying the weight of a world that has been entirely emptied out. Listen to the sound of footsteps on the cobblestones. They are slow, rhythmic, and incredibly tired. Men in worn, gray wool coats are making their way home beneath flickering gas lamps. The hems of their coats are frayed, and the soles of their shoes are worn paper-thin. These are men who marched away to the sound of brass bands and cheering crowds, but they have returned to quiet, shadowed streets, their pockets filled with hands that have nothing left to hold. They keep their heads down against the damp evening chill, stepping over puddles that reflect the pale, fading light. They are just looking for a door to close behind them, a warm fire, and a place to finally rest. But behind those wooden doors, the hearths are cold. Let us step inside one of these kitchens, a small room at the back of a narrow apartment block. The light here is dim, painted in shades of charcoal and fading amber. A mother stands by an iron-cast stove. She is wrapped in a thick, knitted shawl that has lost its color over the years. Her hands, rough from washing in cold water, move with a practiced, quiet grace. She is holding a single, small piece of wood, turning it over, wondering if she should burn it tonight to take the edge off the freezing air, or save it for tomorrow when the frost might be deeper. She chooses to save it. She places it gently back in the woven basket, which is almost entirely empty. On the wooden table sits a chipped porcelain bowl. In it, a thin broth made of water, a pinch of salt, and a single, carefully sliced root vegetable. She stirs it softly. The wooden spoon makes a dull, hollow sound against the side of the pot. Her children are sitting at the table, their knees pulled up to their chests under the thin fabric of their clothes, their eyes watching the faint wisps of steam rise and vanish into the cold air. When she serves the broth, she pours the largest portion into her youngest child's bowl. When her husband returns, bringing the smell of damp wool and cold evening air with him, she will offer him the rest. If they ask her why she isn't eating, she will offer a soft, tired smile and whisper that she already tasted enough while cooking, that her stomach is full. It is a quiet, beautiful lie, whispered in millions of kitchens across the country. A silent sacrifice made of pure love, dissolving into the evening shadows. Out on the streets, the world has become strangely unrecognizable. It is not just the empty cupboards that haunt the quiet hours, it is the feeling that the ground beneath their feet has somehow turned to water. The paper notes they carry in their pockets, the wages they worked so hard to earn, have become entirely weightless. Imagine walking down to the local bakery in the pale morning mist. You are pulling a small wooden cart behind you, the kind a child might use to carry wooden blocks. But this cart is filled to the brim with tightly bound stacks of paper money. The ink on the paper rubs off on your freezing fingertips. The numbers printed on the bills are impossibly large, stringing along with zeros that have lost all meaning. You pull this heavy cart over the uneven cobblestones, listening to the wooden wheels clatter, just to trade the entire mountain of paper for a single, dark loaf of bread. Sometimes, a sudden gust of winter wind sweeps through the square. It catches the top bundle of notes from a passerby's basket, tearing the paper band and scattering the bills into the air. They flutter down the street like dry autumn leaves. And no one runs after them. The people just stand there, hands deep in their pockets, watching their life savings drift into the muddy gutters. It is a surreal, quiet tragedy. Children sitting on the stoops of buildings gather the discarded bundles, stacking them high into towering paper castles, or bringing them inside so their mothers can use them to light the stove. The paper burns fast, offering only a brief, momentary flicker of warmth before turning to delicate gray ash. How does a heart find rest when the world behaves so strangely? In these long, dark evenings, people sit by the window and look out at the silhouettes of silent, hollow factories. They do not want grandeur. They do not want empires or conquests. They just want the world to make sense again. They want to know that if they work with their hands from sunrise to sunset, they will be able to put a warm meal on the table. They want to know that the roof over their heads will still be there tomorrow. They are yearning, with a deep, vulnerable ache, for stability. For a floor that does not tilt. For a compass that points true north. By the faint, amber glow of a single candle, a young woman sits at a small writing desk. The wax drips slowly down the side of the brass holder. She dips a steel pen into a small bottle of dark blue ink and begins to write to her sister in the countryside. The scratching of the nib on the thin paper is the only sound in the silent room. "My dearest Anna," she writes, her handwriting flowing and careful. "The frost is so thick on the window panes tonight that I cannot see the street lamps. The city is very quiet. The bakery on the corner closed its doors today. Hermler swept the floor one last time and hung a wooden sign in the window. He looked so terribly tired. We are managing, little by little. Yesterday, Frau Schmidt from the downstairs apartment brought us a handful of oats. She claimed she had bought too much, but I know she has scarcely enough for herself. It is these small mercies that keep the winter from entirely freezing our spirits. I hope the fields are resting well under the snow, and that the spring will bring a kinder harvest. Please do not worry for us. We simply wait for the dawn." She folds the paper, smoothing the crease with her thumb. It is a letter filled with the quiet heroism of ordinary days. The sharing of a handful of oats. A neighborly smile in a cold hallway. An extra blanket draped over a shivering child in the middle of the night. In the darkest of times, it is always these tiny, whispered moments of grace that bind a fractured world together. But a fractured world leaves deep, invisible scars. The exhaustion settles into the bones. It settles into the plaster of the walls and the wood of the floorboards. Grandfathers sit in their velvet armchairs, wrapped in heavy blankets, closing their eyes and trying to remember the melodies of a time before the world broke. They remember the smell of roasting chestnuts in the squares, the sound of laughter carrying across the parks, the feeling of safety that wrapped around their neighborhoods like a warm, familiar coat. Now, the streets feel unfamiliar, shadowed by an anxiety that no one knows how to articulate. When people are this tired, when the hunger gnaws so persistently and the cold seeps so deeply into the marrow, the shadows begin to look different. The longing for order becomes a physical ache. Imagine the feeling of being entirely lost in a dark, unfamiliar forest. If you wander long enough, shivering and frightened, you will walk toward any light you see in the distance, no matter who has lit the fire. You simply want to stop walking. You simply want to feel warm. This is the quiet tragedy woven into the cobblestones. It is not born of malice. It is born of a desperate, gentle wish for survival. The fathers who stand on street corners with their hands in their pockets, looking for work that does not exist, are slowly losing their pride, piece by piece, like paint flaking from an old wooden door. The mothers who boil water and pretend it is soup are pouring all their energy into keeping a tiny spark of hope alive for their children. As the night deepens, the city finally falls asleep. The moon rises pale and white over the slanted slate roofs and the tall, silent chimneys. Down in the narrow alleyways, the wind whispers through the cracks, sweeping over the worn stones. In an apartment somewhere, a musician takes a violin from its velvet case. He does not turn on the light. He stands by the window in the dark, rests the instrument beneath his chin, and begins to play. The notes are slow, mournful, and incredibly beautiful. The music drifts down into the quiet street, a soft, silver thread floating in the freezing air. It reaches the ears of a tired man walking home, who stops, closes his eyes, and simply listens. It reaches the room of a young girl, who pulls her blanket up to her chin and lets the melody carry her into a dream of blossoming trees. It is a small rebellion against the despair, a reminder that even in the absolute depths of winter, the human spirit still remembers how to create beauty. But beauty alone cannot heat a room. And hope, when it is starved for too long, becomes incredibly fragile. The soil of the nation is being turned over, frozen and tilled by hardship, waiting for any seed that promises to grow. The people are waiting for a voice that says, "I understand your pain. I can fix the broken wheel. I can make the hearth warm again." The shadows stretch long over the cobblestones. The night is deep, and the air is painfully still. Everyone is just waiting, holding their breath, looking toward the horizon, and hoping beyond hope that tomorrow's sun will bring a gentler light. The heaviest burdens are often laid down in the places where the light is dimmest. Imagine the deep, biting cold of a long winter evening settling over the city, a chill that seems to hold the very breath of the streets in suspended animation. The wind sweeps through the narrow, twisting alleyways, carrying with it a dampness that sinks right through worn wool coats and deeply into the weary bones of the people walking home. The sky above is a heavy, bruised purple, devoid of stars, pressing down on the slate roofs. For those wandering these streets, home is often just another cold room, a place where the hearth has sat dark and empty for days, and where the silence only amplifies the gnawing ache of hunger. And so, they do not go home. Instead, they turn their tired footsteps toward the heavy, arched wooden doors of the local beer halls. To understand this moment in time, we must look past the grand sweeping arcs of history and simply step inside one of these crowded, dimly lit rooms. Push open the heavy oak door. Immediately, you are met with a wall of thick, warm air. It smells of damp sawdust scattered on the floorboards, the rich, yeasty scent of dark ale, and the sweet, lingering haze of cheap pipe tobacco. The light inside is painted in soft, fading shades of amber and gold, cast by gas lamps that hiss quietly against the wooden pillars. This is not a place of celebration. It is a sanctuary. It is a shared living room for those whose own homes have become too harsh to bear. Look closely at the faces gathered around the long, scarred wooden tables. These are good, quiet people. There is a carpenter sitting in the corner, a man whose hands are thick with calluses and etched with the deep, dark lines of a lifetime of honest labor. But those hands have had no wood to shape, no cabinets to build, for many long months. He sits with his shoulders hunched inward, nursing a single, dark glass of beer, making it last for hours just so he has an excuse to remain near the large, iron stove radiating heat in the center of the room. Beside him sits a former clerk, his spectacles fogged from the warmth, his once crisp collar now frayed and soft. They do not speak much at first. The hum of the room is just a low, murmuring tide of shared sorrow. They exchange quiet nods. They share a small pouch of tobacco, passing it delicately from hand to hand, a silent communion of men who have lost their footing in the world. When they do speak, their voices are hushed. They talk of the bakeries with empty shelves, of wives who weep quietly in the dark, of the bewildering reality that everything they worked for has evaporated like mist over a morning river. They are drowning in a quiet, collective grief. But grief is an incredibly heavy stone to carry. When a heart is weighed down by sorrow for too long, it becomes exhausted. It searches, desperately, for a place to set that heavy stone down. It searches for an answer, a reason, a way to make the chaotic, tilting world stand still. And in the warm, smoky corners of these halls, a new kind of voice begins to rise above the low hum of despair. It does not begin as a shout. It begins as a murmur, a confident, steady rhythm that cuts through the fog of confusion. A man steps up onto a wooden chair, or a small makeshift stage. He does not look like the wealthy, distant men in silk-top hats who govern from faraway buildings. He wears a plain coat. His boots are scuffed. He looks just like the men sitting at the tables, but there is a strange, fierce light in his eyes. When he begins to speak, he does not offer complex theories or distant promises. He speaks directly to the aching hollows inside the chests of the people listening. He speaks to the carpenter's idle hands. He speaks to the clerk's frayed collar. "You are good people," the voice seems to say, weaving through the quiet room like a spell. "You have worked hard. You have bled for your homes. You have done everything right." Watch the carpenter's face as he hears these words. A profound, almost overwhelming sense of relief washes over him. For months, he has carried the secret, agonizing shame that somehow he is failing his family. He has felt the quiet sting of his children's hungry eyes, wondering if he is simply not strong enough, not smart enough, to provide for them. The shame has been eating away at his soul, carving him out from the inside. But now, this voice in the warm, golden light is offering him a beautiful, intoxicating gift. The gift of absolution. "It is not your fault," the voice insists, growing just a fraction firmer, catching the rhythm of the beating hearts in the room. "You are suffering, but it is not because you have failed. It is because you have been betrayed." It is a subtle shift, as quiet and imperceptible as the turning of the tide in the dead of night. But it is entirely profound. To a man drowning in guilt, the idea that someone else is responsible for his pain is like a life raft thrown into a freezing sea. He clings to it. He has to cling to it, or he will sink. The tragedy of this moment is so delicate, so deeply human. The charismatic whispers floating through the beer hall are not preying on malice or cruelty. They are preying on vulnerability. They are taking genuine, understandable sorrow, the pure love of a father who just wants to feed his child, and slowly, skillfully, twisting it. The voice on the stage gives their invisible suffering a face. It gives their abstract anxiety a name. It takes the heavy, shapeless stone of their grief and chisels it into a sharp, pointed arrow of misplaced anger. By the soft, flickering light of a small oil lamp, in a freezing apartment several streets away, a woman sits at a wooden table, wrapping a woolen shawl tightly over her shoulders. Her name is Clara. She dips her pen into a small glass well and begins to write a letter to her dearest friend in the countryside. The ink is thin, but her letters are graceful and deliberate. "My dear Elise," she writes, her hand trembling just slightly from the cold. "The winter here feels endless. But it is not just the frost on the windows that worries me. It is my husband. For so long, he would sit in the armchair by the cold stove, entirely silent, staring at his hands. He looked so defeated, and my heart broke for him every single day. But lately, he goes out in the evenings to the halls down the street. When he comes home now, the silence is gone." She pauses, looking at the sleeping silhouettes of her children in the corner of the room, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of their breathing. "He has a new light in his eyes," her letter continues. "He stands taller. He speaks of pride, of brotherhood, of a day when our suffering will finally end. I should be happy to see him brought back to life. I should rejoice that the heavy sorrow has lifted from his shoulders. But Elise, I must confess to you a secret fear. This new hope he carries, it feels hard. It feels sharp, like shattered glass. He speaks of the world in terms of enemies and betrayals. I miss the gentle man who simply wept with me. I fear this new strength he has found is built on something dark, and I do not know how to reach him anymore." Clara folds the letter, pressing the crease flat with her thumb. She understands, in the deep, intuitive way that only a loving heart can, the tragic alchemy taking place in the smoky rooms down the street. Back in the beer hall, the speaker's voice has found its crescendo. The murmurs have turned into nods, the nods into murmurs of agreement, and finally, into a unified wave of sound. The men are no longer isolated islands of despair. They are a sea. They feel the warmth of the shoulder pressed against theirs. They feel the immense, intoxicating comfort of belonging to something larger than their own solitary pain. When you have been utterly alone in the dark, the feeling of suddenly moving together, breathing together, and believing together is a powerful, blinding light. The men in the hall begin to tap their heavy boots against the floorboards in unison. The sound echoes against the vaulted ceilings, a rhythmic heartbeat of a collective awakening. They are hypnotized not just by the speaker, but by the reflection of their own reclaimed dignity shining in the eyes of the men around them. They do not see the invisible threads wrapping around their minds. They do not realize that their natural, beautiful empathy, the very empathy that once made them share a single pouch of tobacco, is slowly being closed off, walled in, and reserved only for those who look and think exactly as they do. They are trading their gentle sorrow for a shielding armor of righteous grievance. As the night draws to a close, the heavy wooden doors swing open once more, and the men step back out into the freezing, breathless winter air. The wind still howls. The alleyways are still dark. Their pockets are still entirely empty. The reality of their broken world has not changed at all. But as they walk home, their footsteps are different. They no longer shuffle. They walk with a measured, deliberate cadence. They hold their heads up against the biting wind. They feel a strange, warming fire burning in their chests, a fire entirely fueled by the promises woven in the smoky air. A quiet tragedy is unfolding beneath the sleeping sky. It is the tragedy of a broken heart mended with poison thread. The men returning to their cold apartments are not monsters of the dark. They are fathers, brothers, and sons who were lost in a terrifying storm, and who have blindly followed a charismatic whisper that promised them a way out. They believe they are walking toward the dawn. They do not yet know that the light they are following is not the sunrise, but the faint, mesmerizing glow of a fire that will soon consume the entire world. The night remains utterly silent. The snow begins to fall, delicate and white, covering the cobblestones, softening the edges of the city, and burying the heavy, echoing footsteps of men marching slowly, beautifully, toward a devastating illusion. The frost does not arrive all at once. It gathers, gently and quietly, on the very edges of the leaves while we are looking the other way. Imagine a familiar street, the kind you might have walked down 1,000 times in your life. It is the hour of evening when the sky turns a deep, bruised violet, and the world begins to soften. The stone facades of the buildings hold the fading warmth of the afternoon sun, and the air smells of roasted chestnuts, damp earth, and the sweet smoke of wood fires. For years, this hour was a symphony of neighborly life. You could hear the bright, unspotted laughter of children playing tag on the corner, the rhythmic sweeping of a shopkeeper cleaning his front steps, and the warm, overlapping voices of friends leaning out of open windows, trading stories across the narrow alleyways. But lately, the music of the street has begun to change. It is not a sudden silence, but a slow, deliberate quieting, like the gradual lowering of a curtain. Watch as the lamplighter makes his evening rounds. He is an older man, moving with a slow, practiced grace, reaching up with his long pole to catch the gas mantle of the streetlights. One by one, they bloom into soft, golden halos against the encroaching dark. In the past, people would linger under these pools of light. They would stop to share a bit of tobacco, to debate the news of the day with passionate, waving hands, or simply to rest their weary feet and complain good-naturedly about the weather. Tonight, the light falls on empty cobblestones. The people are still here, but they are moving differently. They walk with their heads bowed just a fraction lower. They pull their collars up tight around their necks, though the wind is not particularly cold. When they pass an old acquaintance, the warm, booming greetings of yesterday are gone, replaced by a swift, tight nod. A fleeting glance. A hurried quickening of the pace. They are retreating behind the heavy wooden doors of their apartments, turning the brass locks with a soft, definitive click. To understand the profound sorrow of this moment, we must look at the spaces where people used to be. Let us step out of the evening chill and into the warmth of the neighborhood cafe. The air here is thick with the comforting aroma of ground coffee and old paper. In the corner, next to the window that looks out onto the square, sits a small, round table with a marble top. For over a decade, two men have sat at this table every Tuesday evening. They would lean over a worn wooden chessboard, moving knights and pawns while loudly, wonderfully arguing about philosophy, poetry, and the direction of the world. They were a fixture of the room, as permanent as the brass coat racks or the ticking clock on the wall. Tonight, only one man sits at the marble table. He stares down at the chessboard, where the pieces are perfectly set up in their starting rows. He slowly traces the rim of his porcelain teacup with a trembling finger. He does not look toward the door. He does not ask the waiter if his friend has sent word that he will be late. And most heartbreakingly of all, the waiter does not ask him where his friend is. This is the new language of the city. It is a language composed entirely of things left unsaid. His friend, the man with the booming laugh and the contrary opinions, simply did not come home yesterday. His voice, which had always been so bright and dissenting, has vanished into the gray mist of the changing world. And the chilling reality settling over the cafe is that asking a question has suddenly become a dangerous thing. The patrons sip their coffee, their eyes fixed firmly on their own hands. The trust that once bound this room together, the beautiful, invisible thread of community, is slowly, painfully fraying. It is a terrible, quiet erosion. You do not wake up one morning to find that your neighbors are strangers. Instead, it happens in tiny, agonizing fragments. It happens at the grocer's counter. A woman who has bought apples from the same merchant for 20 years hands him her coins. She used to linger, asking after his ailing mother, teasing him about his messy apron. Today, she notices a new, crisp insignia pinned to the lapel of his coat. It is a small thing, made of stamped metal, but it sits there like a lock on a door. She looks at the pin, then looks at his face, trying to find the man she has known for 2 decades. He offers her a smile, but it does not reach his eyes. She takes her apples, whispers a polite thank you, and steps back out into the gray afternoon, feeling a sudden, deep hollow in her chest. The world has shifted beneath her feet, and she realizes she can never speak freely in that shop again. This sudden chill creeps under the cracks of the doors and settles right into the heart of the home. Imagine a small, dimly lit dining room. A family is gathered around a simple meal of boiled potatoes and dark bread. The father, a gentle man who has always taught his children to ask questions and seek the truth, is listening to his 10-year-old son speak. The boy is excited. His eyes are wide as he repeats a new song he learned at school today, a song with a marching rhythm and words that feel hard and sharp, like stones. The boy does not understand the meaning of the words, he only knows the melody is catchy and the teacher praised him for singing it so loudly. Across the table, the mother and father meet each other's eyes. In that single, fleeting glance, a lifetime of terror and heartbreak is exchanged. The father's hand clenches softly under the table. He wants to lean forward, to tell his beautiful, innocent boy that the song is cruel, that the words are poison. He wants to teach him to be brave, to stand up for what is right. But he looks at the fragile, smiling face of his child, and he realizes an unbearable truth. If he tells his son the truth, the boy might repeat it. He might tell the teacher. He might tell the neighbor. And so, the father swallows the heavy, bitter lump in his throat. He forces a small, tired smile, pats his son's hand, and tells him to eat his dinner before it gets cold. The sanctuary of the home has been breached. The outside world has built a wall between a father and his own child, and the silence in the room is deafening. In the darkest hours of the night, when the city is submerged in sleep, this heavy silence is broken only by the scratch of a steel pen. In a high, narrow attic room, lit by the meager flame of a single candle, a young university student named Ilara sits wrapped in a woolen blanket. The air is freezing, but she barely notices. She is writing to her older brother, who left the country years ago and now lives an ocean away. She writes in tiny, cramped letters, pausing constantly to listen to the sounds of the stairwell outside her door. My dearest Leo, she writes, her breath pluming in the cold air. I hope this letter finds its way to your hands. The city is so beautiful under the autumn rain, just as it always was, but it feels like we are living underwater. The air is so thick. Do you remember Professor Klein? The one who used to lend us books from his own library and let us debate in his office until the stars came out? His office door was locked on Monday. The university said he has retired to the country. But Leo, I walked past his apartment on my way home. The curtains were torn, and his beloved books were scattered across the wet pavement in the alleyway. Nobody stopped to pick them up. I wanted to, Leo. I wanted to gather the pages, but the neighbor from across the hall was watching me from his window. He was just standing there, in the dark, watching. A tear slips down Alara's cheek, catching the amber candlelight before falling onto the paper, blurring the dark blue ink. I am so tired of being afraid of the people I grew up with, the letter continues. I am tired of measuring every word before I let it leave my mouth. The worst part is not the men who march in the squares. The worst part is the quietness of everyone else. It is the way we all agree to look away. Please, keep the memory of us as we used to be. Keep the memory of the light. She carefully folds the paper, slipping it inside the spine of an old, hollowed-out dictionary. Tomorrow, she will try to find a sailor at the docks willing to smuggle it out. It is a desperate, fragile act of keeping the truth alive. This is how the shadows deepen. Not with grand battles or deafening explosions, but with the soft click of a closing door, the lowering of a voice, the turning of a head. But even in this profound, suffocating chill, the human spirit refuses to freeze entirely. Beneath the heavy blanket of fear, tiny, invisible embers of grace continue to burn. Listen to the quiet rustle in the hallway of an apartment building just before dawn. An elderly woman, wrapped in a faded dressing gown, cracks her door open just an inch. She peers out into the dim corridor. Down the hall, the door to the Mendel family's apartment stands slightly ajar. The family was taken in the middle of the night. There was no shouting, just the muffled sound of heavy boots on the stairs and a car engine fading into the distance. On the stoop outside the Mendel's door sits a small, glass bottle of milk, delivered fresh by the milkman just moments ago. The elderly woman knows that to be seen associating with the empty apartment is dangerous. She knows she should close her door, turn the lock, and pretend she heard nothing, saw nothing. But she thinks of the Mendel's youngest daughter, a girl who used to help her carry her groceries up the steep stairs. She thinks of the absolute indignity of that small, innocent bottle of milk sitting abandoned in the cold. With trembling hands, she steps out into the hallway. Her bare feet make no sound on the wooden floorboards. She walks to the abandoned door, gently picks up the cold glass bottle, and holds it against her chest. She reaches out and pulls the Mendel's door shut, ensuring it latches securely, a small, fiercely protective gesture for a family that is already gone. She carries the milk back to her own room and softly weeps as she pours it. It is a microscopic rebellion. A quiet, terrifying act of love in a world that has mandated cruelty. These are the moments that history rarely records, yet they are the very heartbeat of humanity. The secret glances of solidarity shared between two strangers reading the same banned poem on a crowded tram. The baker who accidentally drops an extra loaf of bread into the basket of a woman whose husband was taken away, never meeting her eyes, just nodding quickly toward the door. The people who sit in the dark and stubbornly, quietly refuse to let the cold take root in their own hearts. As the night stretches on, the streetlights outside burn with a lonely, isolated glow. They illuminate the cobblestones, the mist, and the empty benches. The world has grown terrifyingly quiet, and the people are hidden away in the shadows of their own homes, wrestling with the heavy, sinking realization that the ground they stand on is breaking apart. They are learning to survive in the fading light. They are learning to speak in whispers, to hide their thoughts in the deepest chambers of their minds, and to wait. The night is long, and the air is desperately cold, but deep inside the quiet rooms and behind the locked doors, the faint, fragile hope of morning is still fiercely guarded. The brightest summer mornings can sometimes cast the longest, coldest shadows. Imagine waking up, not to the heavy, silent ache of the freezing years, but to the warm, golden light of a perfect July morning. The air spilling through the open window is sweet, carrying the scent of blooming linden trees and the faint, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, the streets below are alive with a gentle, humming energy. The factories down in the valley are blowing their whistles, a sound that used to mean nothing but empty promises, but now signifies honest work and a full wage. The baker on the corner has flour on his apron again, and the shelves inside his small shop are stacked with heavy, dark loaves and delicate pastries. To a people who have spent a decade holding their breath, rationing their firewood, and boiling water to make thin, tasteless soups, this sudden rush of normalcy feels like a profound and absolute miracle. It feels like the breaking of a terrible fever. There is a new coat of paint on the park benches. The cobblestones have been swept clean. The fathers who used to stand on the street corners, their shoulders slumped in the heavy posture of the unemployed, are now walking with purpose, their heads held high, carrying tools and lunch pails. The mothers who used to lie awake, calculating the impossible math of how to feed 3 children on a handful of coins, are finally sleeping through the night. The immense, crushing weight of survival has been lifted. The world, it seems, has been put back together. But if you stand very still and look up at the architecture of the city, you will see the cost of this new world fluttering in the wind. Hanging from the wrought iron balconies, draped over the majestic stone facades of the old libraries, and strung between the newly painted lampposts, are the banners. They are vast, striking, and impossibly bright. Their colors are bold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the soft, weathered stone of the ancient city. When the summer breeze catches them, the heavy fabric snaps with a crisp, rhythmic crack. It is a festive sight at first glance, like a grand carnival that has taken over the town. But the banners are everywhere. They cover the windows. They obscure the intricate carvings of the old churches. They wrap the entire city in a uniform, wrapping the soft, beautifully chaotic edges of human life in sharp, rigid lines. And this uniformity is not just draping the buildings, it is walking through the front doors of the homes. Let us step out of the bright summer sun and into the quiet sanctuary of a small, neat kitchen. The morning light filters through lace curtains, casting delicate, intricate patterns on the scrubbed wooden table. A mother stands at her ironing board. The iron hisses softly as she presses it against a piece of fabric. But she is not ironing the soft, worn linen of her child's playclothes. She is ironing a uniform. It is a small uniform, tailored perfectly for a 12-year-old boy. The fabric is stiff, the seams are rigidly straight, and the colors mirror the stark, unyielding banners flying outside. She smooths the collar with her thumb, feeling the heavy weave of the material. She is a mother who has spent her entire life trying to keep her child soft, trying to protect his tender heart from the sharp edges of the world. Now, she is preparing the very armor that the world has demanded he wear. The door opens, and her son walks in. His hair is combed neatly. His eyes are bright with an eager, consuming fire. He takes the shirt from her hands with a brisk nod, a gesture that feels strangely formal for a child standing in his own kitchen. He buttons the shirt all the way to his throat. He ties the dark neckerchief with practiced, precise movements. He slips a polished leather slide over the fabric, ensuring it sits perfectly straight against his chest. When he turns to look at his mother, a cold, invisible hand grips her heart. He looks entirely foreign to her. He looks proud, undeniably healthy, and beautifully alive. But the gentle, messy, daydreaming boy who used to build wobbly wooden castles in the corner of the room is gone. In his place stands a miniature soldier. He stands at attention. He does not slouch. He does not fidget. He is waiting for an order. She tells him he looks handsome, forcing a warm, steady smile to her lips. She hands him his lunch, wrapped in wax paper. He takes it, clicks his heels together just slightly, a sound that echoes terribly on the kitchen floorboards, and marches out the front door. She walks to the window, pulling the lace curtain back just an inch, and watches him walk down the street. He joins a stream of other boys, all wearing the exact same colors, all moving with the exact same brisk, purposeful stride. They look like a river of identical drops of water, washing away the vibrant, individual colors of childhood. She lets the curtain fall. She sits down at the empty wooden table, surrounded by the smell of fresh coffee and the comforting warmth of the morning, and she silently weeps. She is well fed. Her house is warm. Her husband has a job. But she realizes, with a quiet, devastating clarity, that prosperity is an illusion when the price of the bread is the soul of your child. Later in the afternoon, the quiet of the town is broken by the rhythmic, hypnotic beating of snare drums. If we walk down to the town square, we can stand among the crowds lining the sidewalks. The summer sun is high, casting brilliant light over the cheering people. They are throwing flowers. They are waving small flags. And marching down the center of the wide cobblestone avenue are the children. Listen to the sound of their boots. It is not the scattered, joyful patter of kids running through a meadow. It is a unified, heavy thud. Hundreds of small boots striking the stone at the exact same moment. Thump. 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 It is a mesmerizing, deeply unsettling rhythm. They march in perfect squares. Their faces are set in expressions of rigid determination. They stare straight ahead, their young jaws clenched, their eyes fixed on an invisible horizon that has been drawn for them by older, colder men. On the sidewalk, a father stands with his hands deep in his pockets. He is a man in his late 30s, a man who still carries a slight limp from a war he fought when he was barely more than a boy himself. He watches the parade with a heavy, unmoving expression. The people around him are smiling, swept up in the beautiful, orchestrated pageantry of it all. They see discipline. They see the glorious future of the nation marching in the sun. But this father knows what the sound of marching boots truly means. He listens to the snare drums, and beneath their crisp, snappy rhythm, he hears the deep, muddy artillery of the past. He looks at the perfectly aligned rows of 10- and 12-year-old boys, and he does not see a glorious future. He sees a harvest. He sees a generation being carefully, systematically cultivated for a purpose they are entirely too young to understand. He watches his own son march past. The boy is carrying a heavy brass flagpole, his face flushed with exertion and absolute, unquestioning devotion. The father's heart aches with a ferocious, helpless love. He wants to step off the curb, walk into the middle of the street, take the heavy pole from his son's hands, and carry the boy away into the quiet woods. He wants to tell him that there is no glory in moving exactly like everyone else. He wants to tell him that true courage is gentle, not rigid. But the father stays rooted to the sidewalk. He does not move. He does not speak. Because standing right beside him is a neighbor, a man he has known for 10 years, who is clapping loudly and watching the father from the corner of his eye. The father knows that a single look of disapproval, a single sigh of dissent, could cost him his job, his freedom, and his family. So, he claps his hands together, mimicking the rhythm of the crowd, while inside, his spirit is screaming into an empty void. This profound isolation is the darkest shadow cast by the summer sun. It is a loneliness that exists in crowded rooms and bustling streets. In the evening, when the heat of the day has finally broken and the sky turns a soft, bruised lavender, a woman sits at a small writing desk in her bedroom. She lights a single lamp with a frosted glass shade. She pulls out a piece of pale blue stationery and begins to write to her sister, who lives far away in the quiet mountains. "My dearest Clara," she writes, her pen moving with a slow, deliberate sadness. "The town was so beautiful today. The bakery sent over a cake with real cream, and the radio played such cheerful music. But I feel as though I am living in a house made of glass, waiting for the first stone to be thrown. It is the children, Clara. They are slipping away from us. When we sit down for dinner, My own daughter looks at me not with the eyes of a child, but with the eyes of an inspector. If I complain about the price of milk, she recites a slogan she learned at her afternoon meeting. If her father tells a joke that is even slightly cynical, she goes perfectly quiet, her face hardening like clay in the sun. The mother pauses, looking at the ink glistening wetly on the page. A moth flutters gently against the glass of the lamp. I am terrified of my own little girl, the letter continues, the words pouring out in a whispered confession. They have taken her need to belong, her beautiful, natural desire to be part of something grand, and they have weaponized it. They have given her songs and uniforms and fires in the night, and they have told her that she belongs to them now, not to us. I tuck her into bed, and she feels like a stranger sleeping in my home. We have everything we need to live, Clara. We have coal, we have bread, we have shoes without holes. But I would trade every single crumb of this prosperity just to have my messy, laughing, disobedient daughter back. She folds the letter, a small, fragile testament to a heartbreak that cannot be spoken aloud. Outside, the night has fully fallen. Beyond the edges of the town, out in the open fields, the sky is glowing with an artificial, flickering orange light. It is the light of the massive bonfires built by the youth groups. If you listen closely to the evening breeze, you can hear them singing. Hundreds of young, clear voices drifting across the dark fields. It is a beautiful sound, perfectly harmonized, rising into the starry night. But there is a sharp, terrifying edge to the melody. It lacks the spontaneous, chaotic joy of youth. It is too perfect. It is the sound of individual voices being melted down in the heat of the bonfire, fusing together into a single, massive instrument of the state. Back in the quiet houses, the parents listen to the distant singing through their open windows. They lie in the dark, pulling their quilts up to their chins. They listen to the breeze rustling the leaves of the linden trees and snapping the heavy fabric of the banners hung across the street. The town is safe. The doors are locked. The cupboards are full. The illusion is utterly complete. But as they drift into sleep, the anxious parents know the terrible truth. The prosperity is a beautiful, brightly colored curtain, drawn tight across the window. And somewhere, just behind that curtain, an unimaginable storm is quietly gathering its strength. They can feel the air pressure dropping in their very bones. They can only hold each other in the dark, whisper prayers for the souls of their marching children, and wait for the morning sun to rise again over a city that has quietly surrendered its heart. A single stone, cast in the dark, can rewrite the history of an entire street before the sun even has a chance to rise. Imagine a morning where the air is extraordinarily still. The sky is a pale, milky gray, just beginning to wake up, holding the quiet breath of late autumn. Usually, at this hour, the avenue is a beautiful symphony of gentle beginnings. You would hear the soft thud of the baker throwing sacks of flour onto his wooden counter, the rattle of a bicycle chain as the milkman makes his rounds, and the pleasant, muffled scraping of shopkeepers rolling up their canvas awnings. It was a street built on the comforting rhythm of everyday life. But this morning, the music is entirely gone. In its place is a silence so heavy, so deeply unnatural, that it presses against the chest. If you walk down the cobblestones now, you must step very carefully. The ground is covered in a strange, shimmering frost. It catches the pale morning light, sparkling with a terrifying, fractured beauty. But it is not frost. It is glass. It lies in brilliant, jagged pools across the pavement. It spills from the window frames of the tailor's shop, the apothecary, the small corner grocery, and the bookstore. The storefronts, which for generations stood like warm, welcoming faces open to the neighborhood, are now hollowed out. They are dark, wounded caves, exposing the fragile, private lives inside to the biting wind. Stand quietly near the corner, beside the old iron lamppost, and look across the street. There is an older man standing on the pavement. He is wearing a heavy woolen coat that has seen many winters, tightly buttoned up to his chin. In his withered, trembling hands, he holds a simple wooden broom. His name is unspoken in the chill air, but everyone on this street knows him. For 40 years, he has been the clockmaker. His shop window was once a marvel, filled with delicate, ticking wonders. Pocket watches of polished silver, grand mahogany mantel clocks, and tiny, intricate mechanisms that could mimic the song of a meadowlark. Children used to press their noses against the glass on their way home from school, leaving small, foggy clouds of breath, just to watch the tiny brass pendulums swing back and forth. Now, there is no glass to press against. The window is an empty, jagged mouth. Inside the shop, the delicate clocks have been swept off their shelves, their beautiful, beating hearts smashed into silence. Watch the old man as he lowers his broom to the pavement. He does not shout. He does not weep aloud. He simply begins to sweep. Swoosh. Scrape. Swoosh. The sound of the straw bristles pushing the heavy shards of glass across the stone is incredibly lonely. It is the only sound on the street. With every sweep of the broom, he is not just moving broken glass, he is gathering up the shattered fragments of his entire life. He is sweeping away the memory of the young couples who bought their first clock from him. He is sweeping away the warm, afternoon sunlight that used to filter through the painted lettering on his window. He is sweeping away 40 years of belonging. What breaks a heart most completely is not the sudden violence of the night. It is the morning after. It is the terrifying, dawning realization that the world you woke up in is not the world you went to sleep in, and that the people you trusted have quietly let it happen. As the morning slowly brightens, doors along the street begin to open. Neighbors step out onto their stoops. These are the same people who, just a week ago, would tip their hats to the clockmaker, ask after his rheumatism, and share a warm cup of coffee in the square. But today, a deep, invisible chasm has opened up between them. The neighbors walk down the street, their collars turned up, their eyes fixed stubbornly on the ground ahead of them. They step carefully around the piles of swept glass. Some of them walk with a hurried, nervous pace, others stroll with an unnatural, forced casualness. But not a single one stops. Not a single one looks the old man in the eye. The clockmaker pauses, leaning heavily on the wooden handle of his broom. He watches a woman walk past. She is wearing a green woolen hat. He knows her well, he repaired her father's pocket watch just last spring. He waits for her to glance up, just for a fraction of a second. He waits for a nod, a whispered word, a fleeting look of shared sorrow. But she turns her face toward the opposite side of the street, quickening her pace until she disappears around the corner. The silence of a friend is far sharper than any stone thrown in the dark. It cuts deeper than the glass. The clockmaker closes his eyes, takes a slow, shaky breath of the cold air, and begins to sweep again. Swoosh. Scrape. The sound is a quiet, rhythmic lullaby for a community that has lost its soul. Yet, even in the absolute center of this devastation, the human spirit refuses to be entirely extinguished. Kindness, when it is outlawed, does not vanish. It simply goes into hiding. It becomes a secret, whispered thing, taking refuge in the shadows. A little further down the street, the door to the bakery opens just a crack. The baker's wife, a small woman with flour still dusting her apron, peers out. She looks to the left, then to the right, ensuring the street is relatively empty and no men in dark uniforms are lingering in the square. She steps out holding a small, brown paper parcel. She does not walk over to the clockmaker. To do so would be too dangerous, too visible in this terrifying new world. Instead, she walks to the edge of his property line, near a small stone bench where his customers used to wait in the sun. She drops her own handkerchief, pretending to bend down to retrieve it. In that single, fluid motion, she leaves the warm paper parcel on the bench. She stands up, catches the clockmaker's eye for the briefest of moments, and gives a microscopic, almost imperceptible nod. Then, she hurries back inside her bakery, turning the deadbolt behind her. The clockmaker slowly walks over to the bench. He picks up the parcel. Through the paper, he can feel the radiating heat of a freshly baked roll. It is a tiny, fragile offering. A warm, silent apology for the cruelty of the world. He holds it against his chest, closing his eyes as a single, hot tear finally spills over his withered cheek, losing itself in his gray beard. And that warm piece of bread is the whispered promise that humanity, though deeply wounded, is not entirely dead. This profound, quiet sorrow is not contained to just one street. It is echoing through thousands of rooms across the country, behind drawn curtains and locked doors. In a city far away, illuminated only by the gray, watery light of an overcast afternoon, a young woman sits on the floor of her bedroom. Her name is Sarah. Around her, the room is entirely dismantled. The heavy wooden wardrobe is empty, its doors hanging open. The patterned rugs have been rolled up and tied with twine. She is surrounded by open leather suitcases, and she is holding a delicate pair of silver candlesticks. They belong to her grandmother. They have stood on the dining room table for every joy and every sorrow her family has ever known. They are heavy, tarnished with age, and incredibly beautiful. She sets them gently down on a pile of wool sweaters and picks up her pen to write a letter to her fiancé, who managed to cross the border into another country just weeks before the borders closed. "My dearest," she writes, using an empty wooden crate as a desk. "I am packing the last of our life today. The house echoes so strangely when it is empty. It sounds like a cavern. We are allowed to take so little, and I have spent all morning trying to decide what parts of myself I must leave behind. How do you fit a lifetime of belonging into a single leather case?" She pauses, looking at the silver candlesticks, her fingers tracing the intricate floral patterns carved into the metal. The streets outside are quiet now, her letter continues, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. But it is the quiet of a graveyard. "Yesterday, I went down to the corner to buy a spool of thread. The haberdasher's windows were gone, entirely smashed. The owner was sweeping the pavement, looking so incredibly small. I wanted to help him. I wanted to take the broom from his hands. But a man was standing on the corner, just watching. And so, my darling, to my eternal shame, I walked past. I kept my head down, and I walked past a man who has known me since I was a child. The glass on the pavement is terrible, but the way this fear is turning us all into ghosts, that is the true tragedy. We are sweeping up the ruins, but I do not know how we will ever sweep away the shame." She carefully folds the paper, tucking it inside the pocket of her heavy traveling coat. She wraps the silver candlesticks in old newspaper, burying them deep beneath her woolen clothes, hiding the light of her past in the dark of her suitcase. Back on the cobblestone street, the afternoon begins to fade into twilight. The sky turns a deep, bruised purple. The clockmaker has finished his work. The pavement in front of his shop is perfectly bare. There is no glass left. But the window frame remains painfully empty, a gaping wound in the side of the building. He stands by his door, his hands resting quietly at his sides. The cold wind picks up, blowing through the empty shop behind him, rustling the scattered papers on his workbench. He does not go inside right away. He lingers on the threshold, looking out at the street that used to be his entire world. The lamplighter begins his rounds, moving silently from post to post. The gas lamps hiss, casting long, lonely shadows across the swept stones. The clockmaker watches the light pooling on the pavement where the glass used to be. He knows that tomorrow, the sun will rise again. He knows that the people will walk past his empty window, and they will continue to look away. The physical debris has been cleared, but the invisible bonds that held the community together, the trust, the warmth, the casual, beautiful grace of being neighbors, have been shattered beyond repair. Yet, as he turns to finally step inside his dark, empty shop, he reaches into his pocket. His fingers brush against the warm, soft paper of the baker's parcel. He takes a breath. It is a shallow, painful breath, but it is a breath of resilience. They have broken the glass. They have broken the clocks. They have broken the music of the street. But as he closes his heavy wooden door against the approaching night, he holds onto that tiny, hidden crumb of kindness. It is a microscopic spark in an overwhelmingly dark universe, but it is enough. It is enough to remind him that even when the entire world shatters around you, the quiet, persistent grace of a gentle heart cannot be swept away. The night settles over the empty window frames. The wind whispers down the alleyways, blowing a few stray leaves across the clean, scarred cobblestones. The city sleeps, restless and fractured, waiting in the deep, freezing dark for a dawn that feels like it may never come. There is a specific, fragile kind of golden light that only falls upon the earth just before a great storm breaks. Imagine a late August afternoon, the kind where the heat of the summer has finally begun to soften, leaving behind a warm, honeyed glow that seems to settle over everything it touches. The leaves on the linden trees are just beginning to curl at their edges, hinting at the autumn to come. The air is remarkably still. If you walk through the city parks, you can hear the gentle, rhythmic hum of honeybees moving lazily through the lavender bushes, and the distant, melodic ringing of bicycle bells from the paved paths. It looks, to anyone passing by, like the absolute height of peace. It feels like a world holding onto a single, perfect, suspended breath. But beneath this beautiful, sunlit stillness, there is a profound and heavy ache. The people walking these paths, sitting on these wooden benches, and trailing their hands in the cool water of the public fountains, all share a quiet, terrible secret. They know the summer is ending. And they know, deep in the marrow of their bones, that the world as they have known it is ending alongside it. Look at the young couple sitting on a checkered blanket in the deep green grass. They are sharing a small basket of dark, sweet cherries. The young man is lying on his back, looking up at the scattered, drifting clouds, while the young woman rests her hand gently on his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breathing. They do not talk about tomorrow. They do not talk about the headlines in the morning papers or the static-filled voices on the evening radio. They have made a silent, sacred pact to protect this one afternoon, to build an invisible wall around the two of them and keep the gathering shadows at bay. She points to a cloud and tells him it looks like a ship setting sail. He smiles, a soft, wistful curve of his lips, and tells her it looks like a sleeping dog. It is a mundane, beautiful, entirely ordinary conversation. But look closely at her hand resting on his shirt. Her fingers are gripping the fabric just a fraction too tightly, her knuckles pale beneath the skin. She is trying, with all the desperate strength of a loving heart, to anchor him to the earth. She knows the letter sitting on the table in their hallway. The stiff, official paper commanding him to report to the garrison by the end of the week. She knows that this golden light, this warm grass, this shared basket of fruit, is the very last memory of a normal life they will have for a long, unimaginable time. And so, she commits every single detail to memory. She memorizes the exact shade of the summer sky reflected in his eyes, so she can pull it out in the dark days ahead, like a small, folded map of home. As the sun begins to lower itself beneath the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the cobblestones, the illusion of the perfect summer afternoon finally begins to dissolve. Let us leave the park and step inside a quiet apartment on the second floor of a narrow, brick building. The windows are open, letting in the cool evening breeze, but the air inside the room feels incredibly heavy. A mother and father are standing in their daughter's bedroom. The room smells faintly of lavender soap and old, loved paperbacks. On the single bed lies a small, worn leather suitcase, its brass clasp snapped open like a waiting mouth. They are packing. They move with an excruciating, deliberate slowness, as if moving too quickly might shatter the delicate silence between them. The mother holds a small, knitted blue cardigan in her hands. She folds the sleeves inward, her thumb smoothing the wool over and over again. She is not just folding a piece of clothing, she is folding her love, her protection, and her absolute terror into the fibers of the fabric. She places it gently into the suitcase, pressing it down to make room for a wooden hairbrush and a pair of thick winter socks. Across the bed, her husband stands holding a beautifully illustrated copy of fairy tales. He traces the embossed gold lettering on the cover. He wants to say something comforting. He wants to tell his wife that everything will be all right, that the train ride to the countryside will be an adventure for their little girl, that she will be safe away from the city, and that they will all be together again before the first snow falls. But the words turn to ash in his throat. He knows the truth. They both do. They are sending their child away into the vast, unknown dark because the home they built for her is no longer safe. He gently lays the book on top of the blue cardigan. He reaches across the open suitcase and takes his wife's hand. Her fingers are trembling, cold as ice despite the summer warmth. He holds her hand tightly, bringing it to his lips, closing his eyes as a single tear escapes and falls onto her knuckles. It is a quiet, devastating farewell spoken entirely without words, a shared mourning for the fracture of their family under the weight of a darkening world. As night falls, the city does not sleep. It waits. In the quiet hours past midnight, illuminated by the pale, lonely glow of a desk lamp, a young man sits down to write. His name is Elias. He is sitting in a room that feels much too large for him now. He dips his fountain pen into a glass bottle of dark ink. He is writing to his brother, who managed to cross the border and find passage on a ship just weeks before the invisible gates slammed shut. My dear brother, he writes, his cursive looping and graceful on the thin, translucent paper. The summer is finally breaking. Today, the sky was so bright it almost hurt to look at it. I walked down by the old harbor, tracing the steps we used to take when we were boys, pretending we were captains of the grand merchant ships. The water was so still, like a mirror reflecting a world that makes sense. But the reflection is a lie. The streets are changing, Leo. The neighbors look at each other with such profound suspicion. The baker closed his shop yesterday, and no one knows where he went. There is a storm coming, a terrible, suffocating storm, and I fear the rain has already begun to fall. Elias pauses, listening to the distant, solitary bark of a dog echoing down the empty street. He looks at his own hands, the hands of a musician, now resting on a rough wooden desk. I have decided to stay, the letter continues, the pen scratching softly against the silence. Someone must stay to remember the quiet things. Someone must stay to remember the melody of the city before it was replaced by the sound of marching boots. I do not know when the post will stop carrying these letters, so I write this now to tell you that I am not afraid. I am only incredibly sad to see the beauty of our world folded away and hidden in the dark. Keep playing the piano, Leo. Keep the music alive where you are, because it is growing so terribly quiet here. He folds the letter carefully, a fragile paper boat cast out into a violently turbulent sea. When the morning finally breaks, the golden light of the previous day is gone, replaced by a pale, gray overcast sky. The air is cool and damp. This is the morning of the great departure. Let us walk together down to the massive, vaulted archways of the Central Railway Station. The scale of the building is enormous, with colossal iron pillars and high glass ceilings that filter the gray light down onto the platforms. It is a place designed for motion, for the loud, chaotic rush of travel. But today, the atmosphere is heavy with a suffocating, unnatural quiet. The platform is crowded. It is a sea of dark wool coats, wide-brimmed hats, and heavy leather trunks. Yet, despite the thousands of people standing shoulder to shoulder, the noise is muffled. There is no joyous shouting, no cheerful waves to passengers in the dining cars. There is only the low, collective murmur of 1,000 broken hearts, the quiet shuffling of shoes on concrete, and the violent, rhythmic hissing of the steam engine waiting on the tracks. Focus on the hands in the crowd. They tell the entire story. See the hands of a young woman clutching the lapels of her husband's coat. Her fingers are white-knuckled, grasping the rough fabric as if she can physically hold him back from the turning gears of history. She buries her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of his shaving soap and tobacco, memorizing the solid, warm reality of him. He rests his broad hand on the back of her head, stroking her hair with a desperately slow, soothing rhythm. He does not speak. He just holds her, absorbing her trembling into his own body. A few feet away, an elderly man is kneeling on the cold concrete. He is eye level with his young grandson, a boy with a small leather satchel strapped to his back. The grandfather's hands, spotted with age and shaking with a slight, uncontrollable tremor, are resting on the boy's small shoulders. He is trying to smile. It is a heroic, devastating smile. He tells the boy to be brave, to listen to the conductors, and to remember his prayers before he goes to sleep. The boy nods, his eyes wide and frightened, not fully understanding why he must leave his grandfather behind. The old man pulls the child into a sudden, crushing embrace, burying his face in the boy's small neck, letting his tears fall silently against the child's collar. Everywhere you look, these quiet, shattering farewells are unfolding in the gray light. It is a symphony of suppressed grief. The people are trying so hard to be strong for each other. They are swallowing their sobs, forcing smiles onto trembling lips, and whispering promises they know they may never be able to keep. Then, the piercing shriek of the conductor's whistle cuts through the heavy air. It is the sound that breaks the spell. The sudden realization that the time is truly up. The physical separation begins. Hands are slowly pulled apart, fingers sliding against fingers, holding on until the very last possible millimeter. The passengers step up into the dark, narrow corridors of the train cars. They press their faces against the cold, smudged glass of the windows, looking down at the sea of faces left behind on the platform. The heavy iron wheels groan against the tracks. The steam billows up, a thick, white cloud that obscures the high glass ceiling. The train begins to move. Slowly at first, a creeping, agonizing crawl, then gathering speed. The people on the platform step forward, right to the very edge of the safety line. Some raise their hands, pressing their palms out toward the departing train as if they can send their love through the glass and the steel. Others simply stand perfectly still, their arms hanging loosely at their sides, their faces completely drained of color. They watch the train cars slide past, faster and faster, a blurring line of metal taking their children, their husbands, their brothers, and their friends away into the mist. As the final car disappears around the bend of the tracks, leaving behind only the dissipating steam and the smell of burning coal, a profound emptiness settles over the station. The people on the platform linger for a long time. They do not want to turn around. They do not want to walk out of the station doors and step back out into the city streets, because they know that the city is no longer the same. The fragile, lingering moments of normalcy have been loaded onto a train and sent far away. The last summer sun has truly set. The sky above the glass roof is a solid, unbroken gray. The storm has not just arrived, it has entirely swallowed the horizon. But as these quiet, heroic people slowly turn up their collars against the sudden chill and begin the long walk home, they carry the warmth of that golden afternoon in their hearts. They carry the memory of folded blue cardigans, written letters, and lingering embraces. They carry the light, a small, hidden ember, ready to be guarded through the incredibly long, dark night that is just beginning to fall. There is a profound difference between the quiet of a peaceful slumber and the heavy, breathless silence of a city that has been told it must not speak. Imagine waking up in your own bed, in the room you have slept in since you were a child. The morning light filtering through the thin lace curtains is the exact same shade of pale gold it has always been. The dust motes dance in the sunbeams just as they did yesterday. But as you lie there, pulling the woven blanket up to your chin, you realize that the air in the room feels entirely different. It is thicker. It is heavier. You listen for the familiar sounds of the morning. You wait for the cheerful, brassy rattle of the milkman's cart, or the rhythmic sweeping of the neighbor brushing the leaves from her front stoop. You wait for the overlapping, musical chatter of the children walking to the schoolyard down the lane. But those sounds are gone. In their place is a new, mechanical rhythm that vibrates through the very floorboards of your home. It is the sound of heavy, leather boots striking the cobblestones in perfect, unyielding unison. Thud. 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 It is a sound that does not belong to your streets, a sound that cares nothing for the delicate, fragile lives sleeping behind the brick walls. It is the marching heartbeat of a new, terrifying reality. The occupation has arrived, and it has thrown a suffocating blanket over the soul of the city. To survive in this new world, the people must learn an entirely new way of moving through their own lives. Let us step outside into the crisp, cool air of the morning. This is the grand public square, the center of the town. For centuries, this wide expanse of stone was a place of joyous collision. It was where old friends embraced, where merchants loudly called out the day's fresh harvest, where young couples lingered by the stone fountain, laughing into the twilight. Today, the square is a place of shadows. The locals are still here, walking to their errands, but they look like ghosts haunting their own lives. Notice their posture. It is a subtle, heartbreaking choreography of survival. Shoulders are hunched inward, as if they are trying to make themselves as small as physically possible. Worn woolen coats are pulled tightly across chests. Hats are pulled down low over the brow. But the most striking change is in their eyes. Watch a young woman making her way across the wide plaza, carrying a woven basket with a single, precious loaf of bread. She does not look up at the beautiful, soaring spires of the cathedral. She does not look at the pale blue sky. She keeps her gaze firmly, absolutely fixed on the ground directly in front of her feet. She has learned the new, vital art of looking down. She memorizes the intricate patterns of the gray slate and the damp, mossy cracks between the cobblestones. She knows that to look up is to risk catching the eye of the men in the dark uniforms who now stand at every corner. To look up is to invite a question, a challenge, a sudden cruelty. And so, she walks in a world that is only 3 feet wide, her universe reduced to the tips of her own worn leather shoes and the stones passing beneath them. This cast-down gaze is the heaviest burden of all. It isolates everyone. Even when the square is full of people, they are entirely alone. They brush past neighbors they have known for 2 decades, but they do not nod. They do not smile. They do not whisper a greeting. They simply become a river of silent, flowing water, parting around the statues and the armed guards, careful never to make a ripple. When they must speak, they use a voice they barely recognize. Let us follow the young woman into the small, dim apothecary on the corner of the avenue. The bell above the door has been carefully wrapped in a piece of soft cloth so that it no longer rings a bright, cheerful greeting, it only offers a dull, muted thud. The air inside smells of dried chamomile, camphor, and old paper. The elderly pharmacist is standing behind the dark wooden counter. He looks up as she enters. There is a moment, just a fraction of a second, where the deep, warm recognition passes between them. He remembers when she was a little girl coming in for peppermint drops. She remembers how he sat with her father when he was ill. But they do not voice these memories. They cannot. The walls are thin, and the shadows outside are long. She steps close to the counter. She leans in, and when she speaks, her voice is nothing more than a breath of air. "Do you have the medicine for my mother's cough?" He leans in to match her volume, his own voice a low, raspy whisper. "I have a small bottle left. Hide it deep in your basket." Their hands meet for a brief moment as he passes the small brown glass bottle to her. In that fleeting touch, there is a profound, desperate transmission of solidarity. It is a touch that says, "I see you. I remember who we are. We are still here." It is a microscopic moment of humanity preserved in a glass jar, passed quietly in the dark. This is how heroism is born in an occupied city. It is not announced with trumpet blasts or grand declarations. It is folded into the silent, mundane moments of the day. It is the grocer who slips an extra potato into the bag of a weary mother, never meeting her eyes, just giving the canvas sack a gentle squeeze. It is the teacher who continues to whisper the banned poems of their ancestors to her students, speaking so softly that the children must lean forward over their wooden desks, holding their breath just to hear the beautiful, forbidden words. It is the neighbor who creeps down the back stairwell in the dead of night, carrying a single piece of scavenged coal, and leaves it silently on the doorstep of an elderly widow whose chimney has been cold for a week. But living in the quiet takes a terrible toll on the spirit. When you are forced to swallow your words, they do not simply vanish. They gather in the chest, heavy and aching. As the sun sets, the city prepares for the curfew. It is a rapid, anxious retreat. The wooden shutters are pulled shut and bolted tight. Heavy, dark curtains are drawn across the glass, ensuring that not a single sliver of golden lamplight spills out onto the street. The city must appear entirely abandoned, a dark void waiting for the morning. Inside one of these darkened rooms, a man sits at a small wooden writing desk. The only light comes from a solitary, flickering candle, shielded by his curved hand so it does not cast a reflection on the wall. He is writing a letter to his wife, who is trapped in a neighboring district across the river, a river they are no longer allowed to cross. He dips his pen into the ink, his hand trembling slightly from the evening chill and the deep, pervasive anxiety that lives constantly in his bones. My dearest Clara, he writes, the nib scratching a soft, rhythmic melody into the silence of the room. The house is so incredibly still without you. But it is not a peaceful stillness. It is the stillness of a held breath. The streets outside our window are unrecognizable to me now. The statues in the park look like strangers. The very air feels thick with a language I do not understand and a fear I cannot shake. He pauses, listening. From the street below comes the sudden, harsh roar of a truck engine, followed by a shouted command that echoes sharply off the brick buildings. He closes his eyes and waits for the sound to fade away into the distance before he returns his pen to the paper. We are learning to live as shadows, my love, the letter continues. I walked past your sister today in the market square. We did not look at each other. We did not speak. I watched her look down at the whetstones, and my heart broke into 1,000 silent pieces. They have taken our voices, Clara. They have taken our laughter, our arguments, our cheerful greetings. They have pushed our souls down into the cellars. But please, know this. Beneath the heavy footsteps pacing outside our door, my heart still beats only for you. I whisper your name into the dark room every night, just to prove to myself that I still know how to speak. He carefully folds the thin paper, making the creases sharp and exact. He will hide it beneath the loose floorboard under the rug, adding it to a growing stack of unsent love, waiting for a day when the mail trains run again, waiting for a day when the light returns. In the room next door, a young mother is putting her little boy to sleep. The child is restless. He wants to sing his favorite nursery rhyme, the one about the little boat on the wide, blue sea. He begins to sing, his clear, innocent voice rising in the quiet room. Instantly, the mother drops to her knees beside his bed. She places a gentle, trembling hand over his small mouth. Her eyes are wide with a sudden, absolute terror. "Shoo, my darling," she whispers, her voice shaking. "We must not sing tonight. The wind is sleeping, and we must not wake it." The little boy looks at her, confused and hurt. He does not understand why his song is suddenly a dangerous thing. He does not understand the men marching outside, or the dark uniforms, or the heavy boots. He only knows that his mother is frightened. She pulls him into a tight, desperate embrace, burying her face in his soft hair. She hums the melody of the song directly into his ear, a breathy, vibrating hum so quiet that it does not even travel past the edge of the blanket. She rocks him slowly, back and forth, mourning the beautiful, noisy childhood that has been stolen from him. She is teaching him the saddest lesson a child can ever learn, that to be safe, you must become invisible. As the night deepens, the city settles into its forced, unnatural slumber. The streets are entirely empty, save for the patrols marching their endless, heavy laps around the square. Their footsteps echo against the ancient stone, a constant, rhythmic reminder of the iron grip holding the city tight. But beneath the cobblestones, beneath the locked doors and the heavy blackout curtains, the true life of the city endures. It is a quiet, stubborn endurance. The people lie awake in their beds, staring up at the dark ceilings. They listen to the foreign boots in the square, but they also listen to the familiar, comforting sound of their own hearts beating in their chests. They remember the bright colors of the awnings in the summer sun. They remember the taste of warm pastries and the sound of free, unburdened laughter echoing off the cathedral walls. They hold these memories close, cradling them like fragile glass ornaments in the dark. The occupation has silenced their voices and forced their eyes to the ground, but it has not reached the deep, private sanctuaries of their minds. They are waiting. With every soft whisper, with every gentle, unseen touch, with every hidden piece of coal and unsent letter, they are tending to the quiet embers of their humanity. The night is incredibly long, and the silence is a heavy, suffocating weight. But beneath the blanket of the dark, the locals breathe together in the shadows, knowing that as long as they hold on to each other in the quiet, the spirit of their beautiful, broken city will never truly die. A folded piece of paper is a remarkably fragile thing to hold the entire weight of a human heart. Imagine a city that has folded itself away for the night. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, and a deep, heavy velvet darkness has settled over the streets. There are no street lamps glowing to guide a late traveler home. The heavy, dark blackout curtains have been pulled tightly across every window in every house, a necessary shield against the unknown sky. From the outside, the neighborhood looks entirely asleep, a collection of silent, shadowy shapes blending into the cold night air. But if you could gently pull back just one edge of those thick curtains, you would see that the city is not sleeping at all. It is waiting. Inside these quiet rooms, the darkness is pushed back by the smallest, most tender of lights. A single candle burns on a small wooden kitchen table. Its flame dances ever so slightly, casting a warm, amber halo that barely reaches the edges of the room. The shadows stretch long and soft against the faded floral wallpaper. In this dim, golden light sits a woman, a heavy woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the evening chill. She is not reading a book, nor is she mending clothes. She is holding a letter. To understand the profound weight of this moment, we must understand the journey of that single envelope. It did not arrive with the cheerful, ringing bicycle bell of the peacetime postman. The morning mail has become a silent, breathless ritual. When the footsteps of the weary postman sound on the morning frost, the entire street seems to hold its collective breath. Curtains twitch just a fraction of an inch. Mothers and wives stand behind their wooden doors, their hands pressed flat against the wood, listening, praying, and dreading all at once. When an envelope is finally handed over, it is taken with trembling, reverent hands. The paper itself tells a story before a single word is read. It is worn at the edges, softened by 1,000 miles of travel in canvas sacks and leather pouches. It smells faintly of damp pine needles, distant wood smoke, and the metallic chill of an unfamiliar frost. It is a piece of another world, a vast, freezing world far to the east, delivered right to the front step. Let us look closely at the mother sitting in the candlelight. She smooths the creased paper flat against the wood of the table. Her thumbs trace the edges of the page, moving with a slow, agonizing tenderness. She is looking at her son's handwriting. Before he marched away, his letters were large, looping, and full of careless, messy youth. He would write his name with a flourish. But the ink on this page is different. The letters are small, cramped, and painfully deliberate. They are the letters of a young man whose hands are perpetually cold, trying desperately to steady a pen in the dim light of a frozen bunker. She reads the words softly to herself, her voice barely more than a whisper in the silent kitchen. He does not write of grand historical movements. He does not write the proud slogans that once echoed through the summer squares. He writes, instead, of the most beautiful, ordinary things. He asks if the old plum tree in the backyard has lost its leaves yet. He asks if the neighbor's dog still barks at the milkman. He tells her that he found a pair of dry woolen socks at the bottom of his pack, and that it was the greatest joy he had felt in weeks. He is trying so incredibly hard to build a paper bridge back to his childhood. He is trying to protect her, filling the page with gentle mundanities to spare her the terrifying reality of his days. But she is his mother. She rocked him to sleep when he was an infant. She knows the rhythm of his soul better than she knows her own heartbeat. She reads the spaces between his words. She reads the profound, echoing silence he leaves out. When he writes that the wind is very loud at night, she can feel the deep, spiritual exhaustion shivering beneath the ink. She notices a sentence near the bottom of the page, crossed out by the thick, dark blocks of the censor's pen. Someone, somewhere along the journey, decided that his thought was too dangerous, or perhaps too honest, to be read. She traces that dark block of ink with her fingertip. She wonders what he saw that made him write those forbidden words. She wonders what piece of his gentle heart has been worn away by the endless march. She does not panic. She just closes her eyes, letting a single, silent tear fall and soak into the edge of the paper. It is a pure, concentrated ache, a wish to reach across the dark continent, to wrap her arms around his shivering shoulders, and simply carry him home. In another house, down a winding cobblestone street, a different candle burns. Here, a young wife sits in an armchair pulled close to a cold hearth. She is wearing her husband's old cardigan, wrapping it tightly around herself as if trying to fold his memory into her very skin. She is holding a letter that arrived weeks late, the paper stained with a smudge of dark earth. Her husband's letter is different. He does not ask about the plum tree. He writes of an endless, flat horizon that seems to swallow the sky. He writes of a silence so absolute that it makes his ears ring. But as she reads, moving the paper closer to the flickering candle, she notices a subtle, terrifying shift in his spirit. We marched through a village yesterday, he writes, the ink pressing deeply into the paper. It was empty, my love. Just empty houses and snow. I found a wooden toy horse lying in the road. It looked exactly like the one I carved for our nephew. I picked it up, and for some reason I cannot explain, I could not stop crying. The other men did not look at me. We are all becoming ghosts in this white desert. She reads these words, and her breath catches in her throat. The man she married was strong, cheerful, and deeply rooted in the warmth of their life together. The man writing this letter is becoming untethered. He is witnessing a darkness that is slowly, quietly dismantling the world he understood. The grand promises of prosperity and glory that they once believed in have vanished, replaced entirely by the terrifying weight of a toy horse dropped in the snow. She holds the letter against her chest, right over her heart. She knows, with a quiet, devastating clarity, that her most important duty is not just to keep the house intact, but to keep his humanity alive. She must be his anchor to a gentle world. And so, she brings her own pen to the paper. She writes to him not of her own fears, not of the empty grocer's shelves or the terrifying sound of sirens in the distance. She writes to him of a beautiful, necessary illusion. She tells him that the bakery smelled of cinnamon today. She tells him that she mended the tear in his favorite armchair, and it is waiting perfectly for his return. She is sending him a lifeline woven entirely of simple, domestic love, hoping it is strong enough to pull him out of the dark. This quiet resilience is the true, unspoken heroism of the home front. When the sun rises, casting a pale, milky light over the city, these women do not stay in their lonely rooms. They gather. They meet in drafty community halls or in the back rooms of quiet churches. They sit in circles, their laps full of rough, gray wool, knitting thick socks and heavy gloves to send to the freezing front lines. Listen to the sound of the room. It is a soft, rhythmic clicking of wooden needles. Click, clack. Click, clack. It is a deeply soothing, constant sound. A meditation in wool. They do not speak of the terrifying dreams that wake them in the dark. They do not speak of the censor's thick black ink or the ghosts wandering the snowy plains. Instead, they share the gentle parts of their letters. They laugh quietly at the story of the stray dog. They trade a precious spoonful of sugar for a handful of oats. They offer a silent, knowing squeeze of a hand when someone's needles suddenly stop moving, and a gaze becomes lost in the middle distance. They hold each other up without ever acknowledging how heavy the burden has become. They are a quiet army of women, fighting an invisible war against despair, armed only with knitting needles, rationing coupons, and an absolute, ferocious love for the men who are fading away into the distance. When the afternoon light fades and the sirens are quiet, they return to their sealed, darkened homes. The ritual begins again. The striking of a match. The blooming of the candle flame. The mother takes her son's letter, folds it along its original, worn creases, and carefully places it inside a small, wooden box on her nightstand. The box holds every letter he has ever sent, a chronological map of his slipping away. She touches the lid one last time, a gentle pat, like tucking a child into bed. The young wife takes her husband's letter and slips it beneath her pillow. When she lies down in the cold, empty bed, she can hear the faint, papery crinkle against her ear. It is the closest thing she has to his whisper in the dark. It is a fragile comfort, but in a world that has been entirely stripped of certainty, a fragile comfort is everything. The candle burns lower, the melted wax pooling softly at the base. The flame flickers, casting one last, gentle dancing shadow across the room before it is carefully blown out. The room plunges into a deep, silent darkness. But it is not an empty darkness. It is filled with the quiet, rhythmic breathing of those who wait. It is filled with the invisible threads of love stretching out across frozen fields and ruined cities, stubbornly refusing to snap. They close their weary eyes, wrap themselves in the memory of a gentler time, and surrender to the night, holding on to the quiet, persistent hope that somewhere, far away, their loved ones are looking up at the exact same stars, dreaming of the very same dawn. There is a silence so vast and absolute that it can swallow a man's soul whole, leaving only the soft, rhythmic sound of his own ragged breath. Imagine a world entirely devoid of color, painted only in endless, sweeping strokes of white and gray. This is not the familiar, comforting snow of a childhood winter, the kind that gathers softly on the window sills and invites children out to play. This is a profound, ancient white. It is an ocean of frost that stretches all the way to a horizon so distant, the curvature of the earth seems to vanish into the mist. The sky above is a heavy, bruised slate, pressing down upon the flat plains, offering no warmth, no sun, and no end. When the snow falls here, it does not flutter. It drifts down in fine, powdery flakes that look incredibly like the gray ashes of a long-forgotten fire. It covers the fields, it covers the roads, and it slowly, quietly, begins to cover the men who are marching through it. Look closely at the line of figures moving across this vast, frozen canvas. They are moving with a slow, agonizing drag, like a column of ghosts wading through deep water. These are the very same men who march through the summer squares with perfect posture, their boots striking the cobblestones in unified, confident rhythms. But the summer is a lifetime away now, a faded dream belonging to someone else. The uniforms that once looked so sharp and unyielding have been replaced by the desperate architecture of survival. They are wrapped in whatever they could find. Worn woolen blankets scavenged from abandoned, roofless cottages are tied awkwardly over their shoulders with fraying twine. Pages of old, discarded newspapers are wrapped tightly around their freezing calves and stuffed into the soles of their boots, a fragile, paper-thin defense against the deep, biting ice. Their faces are wrapped in scarves, leaving only their eyes exposed. And if you look into those eyes, you will see the deepest, quietest tragedy of all. The fire of conquest has been completely extinguished. In its place is a hollow, exhausted stare. It is the look of ordinary, frightened boys who have slowly realized the terrible futility of their endless march. Walk beside one of these men. Let us call him Thomas. He is 22 years old, though the deep lines carved into the skin around his eyes make him look decades older. He is putting one foot in front of the other. Crunch. 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 The sound of his boots breaking through the icy crust of the snow is the only thing keeping him tethered to the waking world. It is a hypnotic, draining rhythm. If he stops, even for a moment, the heavy, seductive blanket of the cold will pull him down into a sleep from which he will never wake. To keep himself moving, Thomas retreats into the safest, warmest place he has left, his memory. As the icy wind howls across the steppe, whipping the snow ashes against his shoulders, he closes his eyes for just a fraction of a second and builds a fire in his mind. He remembers the small, ceramic stove in the corner of his mother's kitchen. He can almost see the glowing orange embers shifting behind the iron grate. He remembers the smell of cinnamon and roasting apples, a scent so rich and thick he can almost taste it on his cracked, dry lips. He remembers the soft, worn armchair where his father used to sit, reading the evening paper while the grandfather clock ticked gently in the hallway. These memories are incredibly beautiful, but they are also deeply painful, because they belong to a world that feels entirely out of reach. He holds them close, hoarding them like precious embers, terrified that the freezing wind will blow them out. Deep inside the breast pocket of his heavy coat, pressed tightly against the slow, weary beating of his heart, is a folded piece of paper. It is a letter from his sister. He does not need to take it out to read it. He has memorized every single curve of her handwriting. He knows the exact weight of the paper and the faint, lingering scent of the lavender soap she kept in her writing desk. My dearest brother, the letter begins in his mind, playing over and over like a comforting melody. The city is very quiet now, and it snowed yesterday. I walked through the park and thought of how we used to build forts by the old oak tree. I hope you are warm. The papers say the victory is close, that you will all be home before the new year. We are keeping your room exactly as you left it. Please, just come back to us. When he reaches that part of the letter in his mind, the part about the papers promising a swift victory, a profound, quiet sorrow washes over him. He looks up at the endless, frozen horizon. He looks at the rusted, abandoned trucks sinking into the snowdrifts, their engines cracked by the ice. He looks at the exhausted men stumbling beside him, their breath pluming in the freezing air. He realizes, with a gentle, heartbreaking clarity, that the grand promises spoken from balconies and broadcast over radios were nothing more than beautiful, empty illusions. The map they were shown back in the warm lecture halls was a lie. The earth here does not end. It just goes on, a vast and different white ocean that cares nothing for borders, empires, or the fragile lives of the men trying to cross it. The tragedy is not just the cold, it is the absolute, crushing insignificance they feel in the face of this timeless winter. As the pale, watery sun begins to dip below the horizon, the temperature drops even further, a physical weight pressing down on their shoulders. The column halts for the night near the skeletal remains of a ruined barn. There is no roof, only 4 crumbling wooden walls offering a meager shield against the wind. The men huddle together in the corner. They do not stand on rank or unit designations. They are just human beings, pressing their freezing bodies against one another in a desperate, primitive attempt to share warmth. Watch as a small, quiet moment of everyday heroism unfolds in the gathering dark. The soldier sitting next to Thomas, a boy named Carl who still has the soft, unlined face of a teenager, is shivering violently. His hands are bare, his knitted gloves lost somewhere in the snow days ago. His fingers are pale, stiff, and curled inward. Thomas reaches into his own pack. His movements are agonizingly slow, his joints aching with the cold. He pulls out a spare pair of woolen socks. They are thin and worn at the heels, but they are dry. Without saying a word, Thomas takes Carl's freezing, trembling hands. He gently guides the woolen socks over the boy's fingers, pulling them up to his wrists, turning the socks into makeshift mittens. Carl looks up at Thomas. His lips are blue, and his teeth are chattering, but his eyes soften with a profound, unspoken gratitude. He nods, a tiny, fragile movement. Thomas nods back. Then, Thomas reaches deep into his pocket and pulls out a small, hardened piece of dark bread. He has been saving it for 3 days, resisting the gnawing ache in his own stomach, knowing that a moment would come when it was truly needed. He snaps the hard bread in half. The crack sounds loud in the quiet barn. He places one half into Carl's newly covered hands and keeps the other for himself. They sit there, shoulder to shoulder in the ruins, chewing the frozen bread in absolute silence. It takes a long time to soften the bread in their mouths. They do not speak of the war. They do not speak of the fear. They simply sit together, sharing a handful of crumbs and the faint, radiating heat of their own bodies. In a world that has been entirely stripped of its humanity, this small, silent act of sharing is a beautiful, towering rebellion. It is a stubborn refusal to let the cold completely freeze their souls. Outside the broken walls of the barn, the snow begins to fall again. It is a mesmerizing sight. The flakes drift down, millions upon millions of them, covering the earth in a thick, soundless blanket. The snow falls on the dark wood of the barn. It falls on the sleeping faces of the exhausted men. It falls on the abandoned machinery of war, turning the sharp, terrifying angles of steel into soft, gentle white mounds. The landscape is slowly erasing them. It is burying the noise, the violence, and the grand ambitions under a layer of pure, quiet ash. As Thomas leans his head back against the rotting wooden planks, he watches the snow falling through the open roof. He feels a strange, heavy peace beginning to settle over him. The sharp, biting pain in his fingers and toes starts to fade, replaced by a slow, spreading numbness. It is a dangerous comfort, but he is just so incredibly tired. He closes his eyes and returns to the warm kitchen in his mind. He sits in his father's armchair. He listens to the ticking clock. He smells the roasting apples. The roar of the Russian wind fades away, becoming nothing more than a soft, distant lullaby. The night stretches on, vast and perfectly still. The snowflakes continue to fall like ashes, a quiet, gentle requiem for the boys who marched too far into the dark, leaving behind a world that will spend a lifetime waiting by the window, holding on to faded letters, and hoping for a spring that, for so many, will never truly arrive. Even the deepest, most absolute darkness cannot stop a star from remembering how to shine. Imagine the exact moment when the day finally surrenders to the night. It is the hour of twilight, that delicate, fragile space between the fading warmth of the sun and the settling chill of the evening. The sky turns a soft, bruised shade of indigo, and a profound, heavy quiet descends over the rooftops. For most of history, this hour was a gentle invitation to return home, to light the hearth, and to gather with the people you love behind the safety of a locked wooden door. But in this particular twilight, the wooden doors are no longer safe. Let us step inside one of these quiet homes. It is a beautiful, modest apartment, filled with the comforting, accumulated weight of a life well lived. There are rows of dog-eared books on the shelves, smelling of old paper and dust. There is a faded, patterned rug on the floor where children once learned to walk. But tonight, the air in these rooms is entirely still, drained of its usual, humming warmth. In the center of the sitting room, illuminated only by the pale, silvery light of the rising moon, a family is standing together. They have been told they must leave. They have been told they have only until morning to gather whatever they can carry in their own 2 hands. Watch the mother as she stands before a small, open leather suitcase resting on the dining table. She moves with an excruciating, deliberate slowness. To move quickly would be to invite panic, and she has made a silent, ferocious promise to herself that she will not let her children see her afraid. Her hands hover over a collection of objects laid out on the wood. How does one measure the weight of a lifetime? How do you distill decades of laughter, shared meals, and quiet Sunday mornings into a single, small bag? She bypasses the heavy silver, the valuable things that the world outside would deem important. Instead, she picks up a small, beautifully embroidered linen handkerchief. It belonged to her grandmother. The stitches are tiny, a delicate floral pattern of blue and gold. She runs her thumb over the soft fabric, feeling the history woven into the very threads. She folds it gently and places it at the bottom of the case. Beside it, she lays a small, battered photograph of her husband taken on their wedding day, and a wooden top that belongs to her youngest son. She is not packing for a journey. She is building a tiny, portable sanctuary. She is packing the evidence that they existed, that they loved, and that they belonged to the world. Her husband stands beside her. He is a quiet man, a man who has always found his strength in the steady, predictable rhythms of his work and his faith. He reaches out and gently places his hand over hers, stilling her trembling fingers. He does not speak. There are no words left that can hold the weight of this parting from their home. He simply pulls her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. They stand there in the moonlight, holding each other in a silence so profound it feels like a physical ache. They are absorbing the memory of this room, the smell of the floorboards, the exact way the moonlight falls across the table, committing it entirely to the safest, deepest chambers of their hearts. When the morning comes, the streets are filled with the heavy, shuffling sound of thousands of footsteps. Families are walking toward the railway stations, carrying their small, battered suitcases. The air is bitterly cold, and a gray, unforgiving mist hangs over the cobblestones. The city they helped build, the streets they walked every day of their lives, now look entirely foreign. Neighbors watch from behind drawn curtains, their faces pale and unreadable, as the river of humanity flows slowly toward the waiting trains. It is here, in the cold, cavernous shadows of the station platforms, that the true, agonizing heartbreak begins. The crowds are immense, a chaotic sea of dark coats and frightened eyes. The air is thick with the sharp blast of whistles and the shouting of men in dark uniforms, organizing the frightened travelers into rigid lines. And suddenly, terrifyingly, the lines begin to split. Let us stand beside an elderly father and his grown daughter. They have clung to each other's arms for the entire walk from their home, a fierce, unbreakable bond. But now, a wooden barrier is being drawn between them. The guards point the father to the left, and the daughter to the right. Watch the father's face. He is an old man, his shoulders stooped with the weight of many years, but in this moment, a quiet, towering dignity settles over him. He does not weep. He does not beg the men in uniforms, because he knows that cruelty cannot be reasoned with. Instead, he turns his entire focus, the absolute entirety of his being, to his daughter. He takes her face in his trembling, withered hands. He looks deeply into her eyes, tracing the shape of her cheekbones, the curve of her brow. He is memorizing her. He wants his face, calm and overflowing with an infinite, unconditional love, to be the very last thing she sees. Do not let them turn your heart to ice, my beautiful girl, he whispers, his voice softer than the steam rising from the trains, but carrying the strength of ancient mountains. Keep your light warm. Remember who you are. He pulls a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket and presses it firmly into her palm, folding her fingers over it. Then, the crowd surges, and their hands are physically, violently torn apart. The space between them fills with strangers, and he disappears into the gray mist. She stands on the platform, the cold wind whipping around her, holding her hand tightly against her chest. Later, in the absolute, terrifying dark of a crowded train car, rattling blindly into the unknown, she will unfold that small piece of paper. It is entirely blank. He had no ink, no time to write a final letter. But she will hold the empty paper to her cheek in the dark, and she will feel the warmth of his hands, the echo of his blessing, and the profound, shielding armor of his love. When humanity is stripped of its homes, its names, and its freedom, it retreats into the only fortress that cannot be breached, the mind. Imagine a dark, freezing room, far away from the city they once knew. There are no windows, only a small, jagged crack in the wooden roof where the cold wind whistles through. The room is crowded with exhausted, shivering people, lying shoulder to shoulder on hard wooden planks. The air is heavy with sorrow, hunger, and a despair that threatens to swallow the room entirely. But listen closely to the dark. Beneath the sound of the wind and the restless shifting of tired bodies, there is a soft, rhythmic murmuring. In the corner, an old man is lying on his back, his eyes wide open, staring up at the invisible ceiling. He is whispering. He is reciting the ancient prayers of his childhood. The words are beautiful, melodic, and entirely out of place in this cold, cruel room. But he does not stop. He whispers them not because he expects a sudden miracle to break down the walls, but because the very act of speaking the words is a claim to his own humanity. It is a quiet, stubborn refusal to let the darkness silence his soul. Beside him, a young woman listens to the rhythm of his prayer. She does not know the words, but the gentle cadence soothes the terrified beating of her own heart. She reaches out in the dark and lightly rests her fingers against his frayed sleeve. He pauses his whisper for just a fraction of a second, acknowledging her touch, and then continues, his voice wrapping around her like a warm, invisible blanket. In the darkest of nights, people find the most extraordinary ways to keep each other alive, not just in body, but in spirit. It is the woman who saves a single, precious crust of dry bread for 3 entire days, hiding it in the lining of her coat, only to gently place it into the hands of a crying child she has never met before. It is the man who, despite the freezing cold, takes off his own threadbare scarf and wraps it around the shivering shoulders of his neighbor, offering a tiny, tight-lipped smile that says, "We are still here. We are still together." These are the quiet, invisible monuments of heroism. They are not built of stone or bronze, they are built of breadcrumbs, shared body heat, and whispered words in the dark. If you look up through the small crack in the wooden roof of that freezing room, past the splintered beams and the heavy shadows, you will see the night sky. The stars are out tonight. They are brilliant, piercing points of silver light scattered across the vast, black canvas. They are entirely untouched by the suffering of the earth below. A mother lies awake on the wooden planks, holding her sleeping child tightly to her chest. She looks up through the crack and finds the familiar shape of a constellation she used to point out from their balcony on warm summer nights. She traces the invisible lines connecting the stars. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, perhaps her husband is looking up at the exact same sky. Perhaps he is looking at the very same star. It is a breathtaking, comforting thought. The stars belong to no one, and they belong to everyone. They are a bridge of light spanning the terrifying distances between torn families. She closes her eyes and sends a silent, desperate message up into the freezing night, hoping it will travel across the starlight and find its way into his dreams. She tells him that she is strong. She tells him that their child is safe in her arms. She tells him to hold on to the memory of their sunlit kitchen, the smell of the morning coffee, and the sound of their shared laughter. This is the quiet dignity of those who were hunted into the shadows. They did not lose their grace, they simply had to carry it in secret. They became guardians of a fragile, precious flame. Every shared crust of bread, every recited poem, every remembered face was a small, fierce rebellion against a machine that wanted them to forget who they were. As the deep, velvet night stretches on, the freezing room slowly falls quiet. The whispered prayers fade into the soft, rhythmic breathing of sleep. The wind continues to howl outside the wooden walls, a cold, indifferent force. But inside, beneath the heavy layers of sorrow and exhaustion, the beautiful, enduring light of the human spirit continues to burn. It is a light that refuses to be extinguished. It waits in the absolute darkest of nights, holding on to memory, clinging to love, and looking up at the twilight stars, dreaming of a dawn that will finally bring them home. The darkest hours of the night are never truly empty, they are filled with the breathless, quiet courage of those who refuse to let the light go out. Imagine a city wrapped entirely in slumber, heavy and still under the suffocating blanket of occupation. From the outside, the streets look perfectly compliant. The blackout curtains are drawn tight, sealing every window in absolute darkness. The only sound on the cobblestones is the rhythmic, echoing tread of the night patrols, pacing their endless, heavy circles. It is a world that appears to have entirely surrendered to the shadows, a world that has learned to bow its head and close its eyes. But if you could look beneath the surface of this sleeping city, down into the hidden, forgotten spaces, you would see a very different story unfolding. You would see the beautiful, stubborn persistence of the human spirit, glowing like a scattering of tiny, hidden embers beneath a bed of cold gray ash. Let us step away from the freezing wind of the street and travel down a narrow, creaking flight of wooden stairs into a damp, stone cellar. The air here is incredibly cold, carrying the deep, earthen scent of old potatoes, damp soil, and coal dust. There are no windows. The only light comes from a single, small oil lamp, its flame turned down so low it is barely more than a glowing blue bead. In this quiet, cramped space, a young man sits hunched over a heavy wooden table. His hands are stained entirely black with ink. It is under his fingernails and pressed into the deep lines of his palms. Before him sits a small, antiquated hand-cranked printing press, scavenged piece by piece and smuggled down these stairs in the dead of night. He moves with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. He must be quiet. The ceiling above him is thin, and the boots of the patrol walk just on the other side of the small grate near the top of the wall. He places a single, fragile sheet of paper onto the metal plate. He turns the iron handle. The press makes a soft, muffled thump, a sound no louder than a heavy heartbeat. He is not printing grand military strategies or loud, violent manifestos. He is printing a poem. He is printing a simple, beautiful reminder of the world they used to know. He is printing the truth about what is happening in the dark, a truth the men marching in the squares are trying desperately to erase. Watch him as he carefully peels the damp paper away from the metal. He holds it up to the dim light, blowing on it softly to dry the ink. He is an entirely ordinary young man. A few years ago, he was a student who spent his afternoons reading in the sunlit parks and worrying only about his examinations. But now, he has become a quiet warrior. He folds the papers into incredibly small squares, pressing the creases flat with his ink-stained thumb. Tomorrow morning, he will walk through the crowded market, his heart hammering against his ribs, and he will let these small squares of paper slip from his pocket onto a park bench, or slide them between the pages of a library book, or press them into the palm of a trusted friend. He knows the terrible risk. He knows that if he is found with the ink on his hands, his life will end. Yet, he sits in the freezing dark and turns the handle again. Thump! Thump! He does this because he knows that despair is a much heavier prison than any cellar. He is risking absolutely everything to give a stranger the profound, comforting gift of knowing they are not alone. Across the city, in a quiet, residential neighborhood where the houses sit close together, another kind of light is being fiercely guarded. Let us enter the kitchen of a small, neat apartment. The linoleum floor is scrubbed clean, and a kettle rests quietly on the cold stove. A woman named Elise stands near the sink. She is a woman of quiet habits, a woman who smiles politely to the baker, who keeps her eyes lowered when the soldiers pass, and who appears to be the very picture of terrified obedience. But Elise is living a double life of unimaginable bravery. When the grandfather clock in the hallway strikes midnight, signaling that the neighborhood is deeply asleep, Elise walks to the back of her pantry. She pulls aside a heavy sack of flour and a row of preserved fruit jars. Behind them is a wooden panel. She presses her hand against it, and it silently swings open, revealing a space no larger than a small closet. Inside this space, huddled together on a mattress laid directly on the floorboards, is a family of 3. They are her neighbors. They are the people who used to live in the beautiful apartment across the hall, the people who were supposed to vanish into the mist weeks ago. Elise kneels on the floor and reaches into the dark. She hands down a small, porcelain bowl of warm potato soup she has been keeping wrapped in a towel to preserve its heat. A pair of trembling, eager hands reaches up to take it. "Thank you," a voice whispers from the dark, so incredibly soft it is almost woven into the silence. Elise does not say you are welcome. She simply reaches out and finds the hand of the mother sitting in the dark. She squeezes it tightly. It is a transmission of absolute, unconditional solidarity. Living in this hidden space is an exercise in profound, agonizing restraint. The family below must not exist during the day. The father, who once had a booming, infectious laugh, now breathes only through his nose to silence the sound. The mother, who used to play the piano so beautifully that people would stop on the street to listen, now spends her days sitting perfectly motionless, her hands folded in her lap. But the most heroic restraint of all belongs to their little girl. She is only 6 years old. She sits on the mattress in the dark, playing with a small set of wooden blocks. But to keep them from clattering against one another, Elise has painstakingly sewn tiny covers out of old rags for every single block. The child builds her silent, fabric-covered towers in the dark, learning the terrifying lesson that her survival depends entirely on her silence. Sometimes, the child forgets. Sometimes, she lets out a small, soft giggle or drops a spoon on the floorboards. When that happens, the terror that floods the hidden room is absolute. The mother instantly pulls the child to her chest, covering the girl's mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with a blinding fear, listening to the ceiling, waiting to hear if the heavy boots outside have stopped. And upstairs, Elise feels the same paralyzing terror. She sits in her armchair, a book open in her lap, her heart racing so fast she feels dizzy. She forces herself to slowly turn the page. She knows that if there is a knock at the door, she must stand up, walk to the hallway, and open it with a perfectly calm, polite smile. She must look into the eyes of the men searching for her friends and lie with absolute, unwavering conviction. This is the crushing, daily weight of carrying another person's life in your hands. In the pale, ghostly hours before the dawn, when the exhaustion finally overtakes her, Elise sits at her small kitchen table. She pulls a worn leather diary from its hiding place beneath the floorboards. She writes by the faint, silvery light of the moon slipping through a crack in the curtains. "I am so incredibly tired," she writes, her handwriting faint and wavering. "Every time I walk to the grocery to buy food, I feel as though the entire street is watching me. I buy an extra loaf of bread, and my hands shake when I hand the coins to the merchant. I wonder if he knows. I wonder if he can see the secret written in the lines of my face." She pauses, resting her cheek against her hand, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing coming from the hidden space behind the pantry. "The fear is a heavy stone sitting on my chest, all hours of the day and night," the diary continues. "But then, I open the panel. I see the little girl holding the cloth doll I made for her. I see the tears of gratitude in her father's eyes. And I know that I could not live in a world where I had turned them away. I am terrified, it is true. But to let them take my friends into the dark, and to simply stand by and watch, that would be a death of my own soul. I will hide them. I will hide them for as long as I have breath in my body, because in this terrible, freezing night, we must be the warmth for one another." She closes the diary, pressing her hand flat against the leather cover. It is a private, deeply beautiful confession. It is the purest definition of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the quiet, terrifying decision that something else is simply more important than the fear. There are thousands of these tiny flickers burning across the occupied lands. They are entirely disconnected from one another, hidden in isolated farmhouses, in the attics of old churches, in the basements of bakeries, and beneath the floorboards of quiet apartments. They are the people who forge travel papers by candlelight, practicing the signatures of the authorities until their hands ache. They are the railway workers who deliberately misdirect a train to buy a fleeing family one more night of a head start. They are the farmers who leave a basket of apples at the edge of the woods, never waiting to see the exhausted, hunted people who slip out from the trees to take them. These quiet heroes do not wear uniforms. They do not receive medals. They know that if they are caught, history will likely never record their names. They will simply disappear, swept away into the very same mist they were trying to protect others from. But they do it anyway. They do it out of a profound, unshakable decency. They do it because they look at the overwhelming, mechanized cruelty of the state, and they answer it with the soft, fragile, unstoppable grace of the human heart. As the night slowly begins to lift, the deep indigo of the sky softening into a pale, bruised gray, the underground world prepares to hide itself once more. In the cellar, Johannes covers his printing press with a heavy canvas tarp. He uses a piece of rough soap and cold water to scrub the black ink from his hands until his skin is raw and red, erasing the evidence of his night's work. He gathers the small, folded squares of paper into his satchel, ready to step out into the waking world and scatter his seeds of truth. Upstairs in the apartment, Elise gently closes the wooden panel behind the pantry. She slides the jars of fruit back into place, arranging them perfectly so that not a single trace of the secret space remains. She puts the kettle on the stove, preparing to face another long day of polite smiles and careful, measured words. The city begins to wake. The heavy boots resume their marching in the square. The oppressive silence returns to the streets. The massive, terrifying machinery of the occupation seems entirely unbroken. But beneath it all, safely tucked away in the damp cellars and behind the false walls, the tiny sparks of light are still there. They are resting. They are waiting. And as long as these quiet, immensely brave people continue to guard the flickers in the dark, the hope for a gentle dawn will never truly be extinguished. A building that has lost its roof can only invite the winter sky to sleep inside its hollow walls. Imagine a city that has been entirely unmade. It was once a place of grand boulevards, of bustling tramways and tall, elegant street lamps that cast warm golden pools on the snow. It was a place where mothers called their children in for supper, where bakers dusted their hands with flour, and where lovers walked along the banks of a wide, flowing river. Now, that river is locked beneath a thick, unyielding sheet of ice, and the city itself has been reduced to a vast, silent ocean of jagged shadows. The buildings are skeletons of shattered brick and twisted iron, reaching up toward a sky that is permanently the color of bruised slate. Through this desolate, frozen landscape, the wind moves with an endless, mournful sigh. It whistles through the empty window frames. It rustles the torn, stiff remnants of wallpaper still clinging to the exposed walls of ruined apartments. It sounds like a great, collective breath, singing a quiet lullaby over a world that has finally, entirely stopped moving. Beneath this frozen surface, buried deep within the dark, vaulted cellars of the shattered city, are the men who were sent to conquer it. To look at them now is to look at the absolute, quiet unraveling of an empire's grand illusion. The pristine, unyielding uniforms of the summer are gone, replaced by a desperate patchwork of survival. They are wrapped in torn carpets scavenged from the rubble, in women's woolen shawls, and layers of old newspaper bound with wire. They are covered in the gray dust of the crushed city, their faces hollow, their eyes sunken. They are so incredibly tired that the exhaustion has settled past their muscles and deep into the very marrow of their bones. But if you sit with them in the quiet dark, you will not find monsters. You will not find the fierce, shouting conquerors depicted in the newsreels back home. You will simply find ordinary, terrified boys. You will find schoolteachers, carpenters, and shop clerks who have been marched to the absolute edge of the earth, only to realize that the ground has crumbled beneath their feet. There is a profound, shifting realization taking place in these freezing cellars. It does not happen all at once, and it is not announced with a trumpet or a sudden shout. It happens in the quiet, empty spaces between heartbeats. It is the slow, dawning understanding that the tide of fate has permanently turned. For months, They believed the promises. They believed the charismatic whispers that told them they were invincible, that they were part of a glorious, unstoppable machine. But machines need fuel, and machines do not freeze. Here, in the absolute depths of the winter, the grand slogans have lost all their power. A speech cannot warm a freezing hand. A banner cannot fill an empty stomach. The men look at each other in the dim, flickering light of a single, hoarded candle, and the truth passes silently between them. They have been abandoned. The world has moved on, leaving them trapped in a monument of ice and ruin. Strangely, with this terrible realization, there also comes a gentle, unexpected peace. When you stop fighting the inevitable, when the immense, crushing pressure to conquer finally falls away, what is left behind is incredibly fragile and profoundly beautiful. The fear begins to burn itself out, leaving only a pure, concentrated yearning for home. In a corner of a collapsed basement, beneath the heavy, groaning beams of a former library, two soldiers are sitting shoulder to shoulder. The cold here is an almost physical presence, a heavy blanket that presses down upon them. One of the men, a former watchmaker named Elias, is carefully unrolling a small, crushed piece of paper. His hands, which used to handle microscopic brass gears with perfect precision, are now wrapped in dirty cloth, clumsy and numb. He is opening a single, broken cigarette. He has kept it hidden in the lining of his coat for weeks, waiting for the moment when the darkness felt entirely unbearable. His friend, a boy no older than 19, leans in close. Elias strikes a wooden match against the stone floor. It flares with a sudden, brilliant, hissing light, casting warm orange shadows against their hollow cheeks. Elias lights the frayed end of the tobacco, takes a shallow draw, and immediately hands it to the boy. They pass it back and forth in absolute silence. The tiny, glowing red ember is the only point of warmth in their entire universe. They do not smoke for pleasure, they smoke for the deeply human ritual of sharing. In this freezing, forgotten hole, passing a crushed cigarette between trembling fingers is an act of profound communion. It is a quiet rebellion against the brutality of their circumstances. It says, without a single word being spoken, I see you. You are my brother. We are still human. As the boy exhales a thin stream of gray smoke, he closes his eyes and rests his head back against the frozen stone. He is not thinking of the enemy. He is not thinking of the war. He is thinking of his mother's kitchen. He remembers the way the afternoon sun used to hit the wooden floorboards, warming the grain. He remembers the smell of melting butter and roasted apples. He remembers the exact sound of the screen door snapping shut on a summer evening. He folds himself into these memories, pulling them around his shivering soul like a thick, woolen quilt. Across the cellar, another man is engaging in a different, desperately quiet ritual. He is sitting near a narrow crack in the wall, where a single, pale shaft of moonlight filters down through the rubble. He is holding a photograph. The edges of the paper are frayed and soft, worn down by the constant, nervous touching of his thumb. The image is of a young woman standing in a garden, holding a small baby wrapped in a white blanket. The cold has seeped into the photograph, making the paper stiff and brittle. He brings the picture to his lips and breathes on it, trying to warm the faces of his wife and child with his own exhausted breath. He knows the terrible truth. He knows that the airfield outside the city has been lost. He knows that the transport planes, the ones that used to bring the canvas sacks of letters from home, will never return. The sky above them is empty. The bridge back to his life has been completely burned away. But the human heart refuses to simply let go in the dark. He pulls a small, stubby pencil from his pocket. He reaches into his pack and tears the paper label off an empty tin of rations. It is the only paper he has left. By the silvery, ghostly light of the moon, he begins to write. My dearest Maria, he writes, the pencil scratching softly against the coarse paper. The wind is blowing so loudly through the stones tonight, but if I close my eyes, the only thing I can hear is the sound of your laughter. The city above us is entirely broken. The snow covers everything, making it look like a quiet, sleeping forest. I want you to know that I am no longer afraid. The fear left me a long time ago. All that is left in this dark room is the love I have for you. He pauses, his hand trembling, a single tear slipping down his cheek and freezing almost instantly against his skin. Please do not wait for me by the window, my love, the letter continues. When the spring finally comes and the ice begins to melt, I want you to walk in the garden. I want you to hold our child in the sun. Do not remember me as a soldier in a gray uniform. Remember me as the man who loved to listen to you sing in the morning. Remember me in the light. I am wrapping my heart in this paper, and I am sending it to you on the wind. He finishes the letter, his handwriting trailing off as the exhaustion finally begins to overtake him. He folds the small piece of paper with agonizing care. He knows there is no postman to take it. He knows it will never cross the frozen rivers or the endless plains. He knows it will remain here, buried in the rubble with him. But the act of writing it, the act of pouring his soul onto the page, has given him a profound, quiet release. He unbuttons the top of his heavy coat and slips the folded paper into his breast pocket, placing it directly over his heart. It feels like a small, warm ember glowing in the dark. He pulls his knees to his chest, wraps his arms around his legs, and closes his eyes. He is ready to sleep. This is the quiet tragedy woven into the shifting of fate. When the massive, invisible gears of history finally turn, they do not grind the commanders or the politicians in their opulent halls. They grind the men in the dust. They grind the watchmakers, the farmers, and the fathers trapped in the freezing dark. As the night stretches on, the temperature drops even further, sinking into a deep, lethal cold that slows the beating of the heart and numbs the mind. The men in the cellar stop shivering. The frantic, desperate edge of survival softens, smoothing out into a quiet, heavy lethargy. The cold is a thief, stealing their energy drop by drop, but in these final hours, it is also strangely gentle. It acts as a narcotic, pulling them down into a soft, painless slumber. They lean against one another, forming small, huddled islands of fading warmth. They share the same dream. They dream of a warm fire. They dream of a soft bed with clean, white sheets. They dream of the people they love, waiting for them at the end of a long, sunlit lane. Above them, the ruined city stands as a vast, silent monument to the terrifying cost of absolute arrogance. The grand columns are shattered. The majestic statues are buried in the snow. The empire that promised them the world has left them with nothing but stones and ice. But the wind does not care about empires. It does not read the slogans on the torn banners, and it does not know the shifting lines drawn on the military maps. The wind simply sweeps through the ruins, a constant, soothing, eternal force. It blows over the twisted metal and the shattered glass, smoothing the rough edges of the broken city beneath a thick, pure blanket of white. It whispers through the cracks in the cellars, a soft, hushed sound that carries away the pain, the exhaustion, and the fear. It plays a gentle, endless lullaby for the boys who marched too far, holding them in the quiet dark, letting them finally rest as the world above them slowly, irrevocably changes. The night sky, once a vast and comforting quilt of peaceful stars, had slowly become a canvas of deep and anxious waiting. Imagine a city holding its breath as the twilight fades. The streets are entirely empty, swallowed by a darkness so complete it feels almost like a heavy, velvet curtain draped over the rooftops. The street lamps are dead. The windows are sealed tight behind thick, dark blackout blinds. If you were to walk down the cobblestones, the only sound you would hear is the hollow echo of your own footsteps, and perhaps the distant, lonely rustle of a stray leaf blown against a brick wall. The world has been commanded to sleep, but inside the cold, darkened houses, true sleep has become a rare and fragile visitor. Let us step inside a small, narrow apartment on the second floor. The air in the bedroom is chilly, smelling faintly of lavender and old wood. A mother and father are lying in bed, But they are not under the heavy quilts, and they are not wearing their night clothes. They are fully dressed in their thick woolen trousers and heavy sweaters. Their shoes are placed meticulously at the exact edge of the rug, the laces pre-loosened so they can be slipped on in a single second. This is the exhausting, quiet ritual of the new reality. To go to sleep is no longer a surrender to rest, it is a tense, delicate vigil. They lie perfectly still, staring up at the invisible ceiling. The father's hand rests on top of the mother's, his thumb drawing slow, soothing, infinite circles against her knuckles. They are listening. They are listening past the quiet settling of the floorboards, past the ticking of the clock in the hallway, reaching their senses out into the cold night sky. They are waiting for the sirens. When the sound finally comes, it does not crash into the room. It begins as a low, mournful hum in the distance, like the agonizing groan of a wounded animal far away in the woods. It slowly rises, pitching upward into a sweeping, mechanical wail that echoes across the chimneys and bounces down the narrow alleyways. It is a terrible, haunting melody, but in this room, it brings no sudden panic. The time for panic has long passed, replaced by a deep, bone-weary resignation. The parents rise from the bed in absolute silence. They move with the practiced, fluid grace of a solemn dance. There is no need for words. The father steps to the window, peering through a tiny sliver in the curtains to look at the sky. It is a cloudless night, and the moon is full and brilliant, casting a pale, silvery glow over the slate roofs. In peacetime, it would be a beautiful sight. Now, it is called a bomber's moon. The light is a betrayer, illuminating the winding river and the shape of the city for the dark shapes moving miles above. The mother walks into the children's room. She bends over the small wooden bed, gently brushing the hair from her sleeping daughter's forehead. "Wake up, my little bird," she whispers, her voice softer than the rustling of the sheets. It is time to go downstairs. The child does not cry. She simply opens her heavy eyes, blinking in the dark, and silently swings her small legs over the edge of the bed. She reaches out and takes her mother's hand. In her other hand, she holds a small, stuffed woolen bear, its button eyes worn smooth from years of being held tightly in the dark. By the front door sits a single, battered leather suitcase. It is the go-bag. It does not contain clothes for a holiday, or books, or toys. It holds the absolute, fragile essence of their existence. Inside are the birth certificates, the ration cards, a few folded banknotes, and a small tin box containing photographs of grandparents they may never see again. It is the crushing weight of an entire life, condensed into a bag that can be carried in one hand. The father picks up the suitcase. The mother carries a thick woolen blanket. Together, they step out into the hallway and begin the slow descent down the wooden stairs. They are not alone. Doors are opening all along the corridor. Shadows move silently down the stairwell, a quiet river of weary humanity flowing downward into the earth. There is the elderly widow from the third floor, moving slowly with her wooden cane. There is the young baker from the corner, his apron still tied around his waist, holding a small hurricane lamp with the wick turned down to a mere blue flicker. They walk down past the ground floor, opening the heavy, iron-hinged door that leads into the cellars. The air down here is entirely different. It is damp, thick, and smells deeply of old coal dust, wet stone, and root vegetables. It is freezing, an earthen chill that sinks immediately through their heavy sweaters. The walls are made of thick, rough-hewn brick, weeping with condensation in the dim, flickering light of the lamps. The families find their places on the hard stone floor. They sit on wooden crates, or on folded coats, huddling together against the brick walls. In this dark, cavernous space, the lines that used to divide the city, wealth, profession, status, have completely dissolved. They are all simply human beings, seeking refuge in the dark, tethered together by a shared, silent prayer. Look at the quiet, breathtaking moments of grace unfolding in the shadows. The young baker reaches into his deep apron pocket and pulls out a single, slightly crushed bread roll. He does not eat it. He leans over and places it gently into the hands of the elderly widow. She looks at him, her eyes watering in the dim light, and offers a slow, trembling nod of profound gratitude. Across the room, a teenage boy takes off his own scarf and wraps it carefully around the shoulders of a shivering dog that belongs to a neighbor. The dog rests its chin on the boy's knee, letting out a soft, trusting sigh. Then, the sound changes. The wailing of the siren outside fades, and a new, heavier sound begins to bleed through the ceiling. It is a deep, resonant drone, a vast, mechanical hum that seems to make the very air in the cellar vibrate. It is the sound of hundreds of heavy engines moving across the stars. The people in the cellar pull their blankets tighter. They close their eyes. They lean their heads against the cold brick and wait. When the earth begins to shake, it starts as a low rumble, like a heavy train passing deep underground. The vibrations travel through the stone floor, traveling up through the soles of their shoes and into their bones. Then, a dull, thunderous thud echoes in the distance. The wooden beams above them groan, a terrible, agonizing sound of timber bearing an impossible weight. Dust begins to fall from the ceiling. It drifts down in the amber light of the lamps like a strange, gray snow, settling on the shoulders of their coats and the tops of their hair. The mother pulls her little girl onto her lap. The child is burying her face in the mother's sweater, clutching her woolen bear so tightly her knuckles are white. The mother wraps her arms entirely around the child, forming a physical shield of pure, fierce love. She leans her cheek against the top of her daughter's head, and she begins to whisper. She does not tell the child that everything will be fine, because she cannot know that. Instead, she tells a story. Once upon a time, the mother whispers, her voice a steady, rhythmic murmur right against the child's ear, masking the terrifying thuds above. There was a little boat made of silver wood, and it sailed on a river that was as calm as glass. The river flowed through a forest where the trees were made of green velvet, and the birds sang songs that sounded like tiny silver bells. Another heavy thud shakes the cellar, closer this time. The hurricane lamp flickers violently, casting wild, dancing shadows against the brick. The mother simply pulls the child closer and raises her whisper just a fraction. The little boat floated all night long, she continues, her voice a lifeline cast into the dark. And no matter how much the wind blew outside the forest, the water in the river stayed perfectly, wonderfully still. And the boat just kept sailing, right toward the morning sun. The little girl's breathing begins to slow. She focuses entirely on the warm, vibrating hum of her mother's chest, letting the story wrap around her like a protective cocoon. In the face of overwhelming, mechanical destruction, this mother is fighting back with the only weapon she has, a gentle, unwavering imagination. It is an act of towering, beautiful heroism. In a corner near the old coal chute, an older man sits with his hands resting quietly on his knees. His name is Arthur. The dust has settled heavily on his gray hair. He is staring into the faint flame of a candle he holds in a tin saucer. In his deep coat pocket, his fingers are tracing the edges of a letter he received 3 days ago from his son, who was stationed far away in the frozen east. He has read the letter so many times he knows the texture of the ink on the page. As the ground shudders beneath him, Arthur does not think of the falling stones. He closes his eyes and mentally writes his reply. My dear boy, he thinks, sending the words out into the dark, smoky air. The earth is shaking tonight, but the foundations of our home are deeper than the brick and mortar. They are built on the memory of your laughter in the garden. They are built on the smell of your mother's baking. They cannot break those things. We are sitting in the dark, but we are holding on to each other. When you look up at the sky, do not think of the machines. Think of the stars. Think of the light waiting to return. We are enduring, my son. We are waiting for you. It is a silent transmission of absolute love, a father reaching across a fractured world to hold his child's hand. The hours stretch on, agonizing and slow. The air in the cellar grows thick and stale, heavy with the smell of plaster dust and fear. People doze in fitful, exhausting bursts, their heads resting on the shoulders of strangers, bound together in the profound intimacy of survival. And then, slowly, the deep humming in the ceiling begins to fade. The thuds grow more distant, echoing further and further away, until they disappear entirely into the vast quiet of the night. A heavy, breathless silence falls over the cellar. Nobody moves. They are waiting for the final, definitive sign. It comes as a steady, unbroken, monotone wail from the siren outside. It is the all clear. The long, single note cuts through the night, a sound of absolute, overwhelming relief. A collective, shuddering breath is released in the dark room. Eyes open. Hands unclasped. The teenage boy gently unwraps his scarf from the sleeping dog. The baker slowly turns up the wick on his hurricane lamp, letting the warm yellow light flood back into the dusty space. The father stands up, his joints aching from the cold stone. He reaches down and helps his wife to her feet. She is carrying their sleeping daughter, who is dreaming of a silver boat on a velvet river. The father picks up the worn leather suitcase, the heavy anchor of their lives. They walk to the iron door and slowly push it open. The ascent up the wooden stairs is slow, a quiet pilgrimage back to the waking world. When they open the front door of their building and step out onto the street, the air is no longer cold and crisp. It smells sharply of burning wood, of pulverized stone, and of ruptured earth. A fine, gray ash is falling over the cobblestones, drifting down like an out-of-season snow. The sky in the east is just beginning to lighten, turning a pale, bruised purple. The silhouette of the city has changed. Where there were once tall roofs and majestic spires, there are now jagged, broken teeth against the horizon. They stand on their front step and look at the altered world. The sorrow is immense, a heavy, sinking weight in the chest. But beneath that sorrow, there is something else. There is the steady, miraculous beating of their own hearts. They survived the night. They are still breathing. They are still together. The mother looks down at her sleeping child, safe against her shoulder. The father sets the suitcase down on the step. He reaches out and gently brushes a layer of gray ash from the wooden doorframe. It is a small, mundane gesture, but it is an act of profound defiance. They will sweep the ashes. They will go upstairs, and they will boil water for tea on the small stove. They will wash the dust from their faces. The night brought terror, and the world above them shook until it felt like it would break apart. But as the pale morning light begins to touch the ruined streets, they simply hold each other's hands, turn the brass handle, and step back inside their home. They will endure. They will guard the quiet, beautiful light of their humanity through the rubble, knowing that as long as they have each other, the spirit of their home can never truly be destroyed. The sea does not keep our secrets, it only holds our breath until the morning comes. Imagine the vast, restless expanse of the ocean in the absolute deepest hours of the night. The water is a heavy, rolling canvas of dark indigo and black, moving with a slow, ancient rhythm that cares nothing for the lines drawn on our maps. The wind sweeps across the white-capped waves, carrying the sharp, cold scent of salt and the damp promise of rain. It is a world entirely suspended in the dark. It is the fragile, trembling threshold between a continent held captive in the shadows and a world yearning with all its heart to breathe again. Tonight, this ocean is not empty. It is carrying the weight of 1,000,000 quiet prayers. If you were to drift out over the dark water, you would hear a sound beneath the wind. It is a low, continuous vibration. A deep, mechanical hum that vibrates through the very mist resting on the water. It is the sound of thousands of engines, turning slowly, carrying a vast, invisible forest of steel across the dark. Let us step down out of the wind, and into the cramped, swaying belly of one of these small, flat-bottomed boats. The air inside is thick and incredibly cold. It smells of damp canvas, diesel fumes, and the heavy, wet wool of coats that have been soaked by the freezing sea spray. The small metal craft pitches and rolls with every swell of the dark water, a relentless, dizzying rhythm that makes the iron walls groan and creak. Sitting shoulder to shoulder on the hard metal benches are the young men. They are so incredibly young. If you look at their faces in the dim, ghostly glow of the small red safety lamps, you do not see the fierce, hardened warriors of ancient myths. You see the soft, unlined faces of boys who, just a few years ago, were worrying about school examinations, or helping their fathers harvest the autumn wheat, or walking a girl home under the street lamps of a quiet town. They are bakers. They are clerks. They are farmhands. And right now, they are shivering. They are shivering from the biting cold of the sea, yes, but they are also trembling with the sheer, incomprehensible magnitude of what they are about to do. They are sailing toward the very edge of the world, and to a dawn they cannot yet see. Sit beside a young man named Thomas. He is 19 years old. His hands are resting on his knees, and his knuckles are pale. The rough canvas strap of his helmet digs into his chin. He keeps his eyes focused on the rivulets of seawater running down the metal ramp in front of him, tracing their winding paths with his gaze. To keep his mind from the terrifying roar of the dark ocean, Thomas retreats into the only sanctuary he has left. He reaches deep beneath the heavy layers of his wet wool jacket, slipping his freezing fingers into a waterproof pouch tucked close to his chest. He feels the soft, folded crinkle of paper. It is a letter from his mother. It arrived weeks ago, but it has not left his heart for a single moment. He does not need to unfold it in the dark. He has memorized every gentle curve of her handwriting, every mundane, beautiful word. My dearest Tommy, the letter whispers in his mind, carrying the warm, comforting cadence of her voice. The garden is finally beginning to bloom. I planted the blue hydrangeas you love so much near the back fence. The old dog still waits by the front gate every afternoon at 4 o'clock, resting his chin on the wood, looking down the lane for you. The house is so quiet, but we are keeping the hearth warm. Remember to keep your feet dry. Remember how much you are loved. Thomas closes his eyes, letting the memory of the blue hydrangeas wash over him. He can smell the damp earth of his home. He can feel the worn velvet of the armchair in the living room. In this freezing, violent metal box, tossing on an angry sea, the memory of his mother's garden is a brilliant, blinding light. It anchors him. It reminds him that he is not just a piece of a massive machine. He is a boy with a home, a boy who is profoundly loved. He is carrying that love across the water, shielding it from the dark. Beside him sits another boy, barely 18, his face pale and slick with a mixture of sea spray and nervous sweat. The younger boy is trembling so violently that his heavy boots are tapping a frantic, erratic rhythm against the metal floor. He is terrified. The fear is a physical weight, pressing the breath from his lungs. Thomas does not offer a grand, heroic speech. Words are far too clumsy, far too small for the vastness of this night. Instead, Thomas slowly takes off his thick, wet glove. He reaches out and places his bare, warm hand firmly over the younger boy's trembling knuckles. The younger boy looks up, his eyes wide and frightened in the dim red light. Thomas simply nods. A slow, gentle, reassuring nod. It is a silent promise. I am here. You are not alone. We will step into the light together. The younger boy swallows hard, closes his eyes, and his trembling slowly begins to ease, steadied by the simple, beautiful grace of human touch. As the boats rock and plunge toward the continent, the dark horizon is beginning to change. Let us leave the freezing water and travel miles ahead, to a quiet, stone cottage sitting on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The village around the cottage is utterly silent. It is a silence that has lasted for years, a heavy, suffocating quiet imposed by the men in dark uniforms who march through the cobblestone squares. The people of this village have learned to speak in whispers, to keep their curtains drawn, and to hide their hopes deep in the cellars of their hearts. But inside the cottage, an old woman named Marguerite is awake. She has been awake for hours, sitting in a worn wooden rocking chair near the window. She is wrapped in a faded quilt, her withered, fragile hands resting in her lap, fingers slowly tracing the smooth wooden beads of a rosary. Marguerite knows the rhythms of the sea better than she knows her own heartbeat. She has watched the tides breathe in and out for 70 years. And tonight, the air feels different. The atmospheric pressure in the room is heavy, charged with a strange, invisible electricity. She stops rocking. She listens. Through the thick stone walls of her home, beneath the familiar howling of the coastal wind, she hears the hum. It is deep. It is resonant. It feels as though the earth itself is vibrating beneath her wooden floorboards. Slowly, her joints aching with the damp cold, she stands up and walks to the window. She pulls the heavy blackout curtain back just a fraction of an inch, pressing her cheek against the freezing, condensation-slicked glass. She looks out at the sea. The absolute blackness of the night is finally beginning to soften. The sky in the east is turning a deep, bruised indigo, dissolving into a pale, milky gray where the water meets the heavens. The morning mist hangs thick and heavy over the waves, a ghostly shroud concealing the water. But as the pale, fragile light of the dawn begins to stretch its fingers across the sea, the mist begins to shift. Marguerite's breath catches in her throat. Her hand flies to her mouth, her fingers trembling against her lips. Through the gray fog, massive, dark silhouettes are emerging. They are not just one or two shapes. They span the entire, vast width of the horizon. It looks as though an entire forest of steel has risen miraculously from the depths of the ocean. The water is completely covered with boats. Large, towering shadows and thousands of tiny, flat shapes, all moving steadily, quietly, inevitably toward the shore. For 4 long years, Marguerite has looked out at an empty, lonely sea. She has watched the waves and prayed for a miracle, wondering if the world had entirely forgotten the people trapped in the dark. And now, the sea has brought the dawn. She does not shout. She does not wake her sleeping neighbors. She knows the terrible danger that is about to unfold on the sands below her home. But as she looks at the unimaginable armada stretching across the gray water, a profound, overwhelming sense of grace washes over her tired soul. She presses her hands flat against the cold glass. Tears, warm and fast, spill over her wrinkled cheeks, tracing the deep lines of her face. She closes her eyes and whispers a prayer into the cold glass. She is not praying for victory or for empires. She is praying for the boys on those boats. She is praying for the mothers who packed their bags. She is praying for the young men who are shivering in the dark, crossing a terrifying ocean to give her back the sound of the church bells, the smell of fresh bread, and the simple, beautiful right to walk freely in the sun. Keep them safe, she whispers, her voice a fragile, trembling breath in the silent room. Hold them in your hands. Bring them to the light. She turns away from the window, walks to a small table in the corner of her room, and strikes a match. She lights a single, white candle. It is strictly forbidden to show a light, but she places the candle firmly on the windowsill, behind the thin lace curtain. It is a tiny, microscopic beacon of warmth, a silent welcome from the shore to the sea. Back on the water, the gray light of the dawn is finally spilling into the cramped metal boats. The absolute darkness is gone, replaced by a pale, watery illumination that reveals the exhausted, determined faces of the young men. The engines grow louder, a deafening, rhythmic roar that drowns out the sound of the crashing waves. Thomas looks down at his hand, still resting on the shoulder of the younger boy. He gives it one final, reassuring squeeze before pulling his glove back on. He takes a deep breath of the cold, salty air, filling his lungs with the morning. He feels the envelope in his coat. He thinks of the blue hydrangeas. He thinks of the dog waiting by the gate. He gathers every beautiful, gentle memory he possesses, folding them around his heart like an impenetrable armor of light. The boat suddenly shudders. The bottom of the metal hull scrapes against the hidden sandbar with a deep, grinding groan. The forward motion stops. This is the moment. The threshold has been reached. The suspended breath of the night is finally exhaled into the dawn. The heavy iron ramp at the front of the boat slowly begins to lower. It does not fall into darkness. As the metal door drops flat against the churning, foamy water, a brilliant, pale golden light from the rising sun spills directly into the belly of the craft. It washes over the boots, the canvas jackets, and the terrified, courageous faces of the young men. The water waiting for them is cold and deep, and the beach ahead is a terrifying, unknown expanse. But they do not turn back. They cannot turn back. Thomas stands up. He looks at the pale sand in the distance. He looks at the light breaking through the clouds. He does not feel like a hero. He just feels like a boy who wants to go home, and he knows that the only way back to his mother's garden is to step forward into the water. With a quiet, trembling breath, he steps off the metal ramp and into the sea. The tide is pulling back from the shore, the water rushing around their knees, a natural, eternal rhythm that has washed the earth clean for millions of years. The morning sun rises higher, chasing the last shadows of the night away from the coast. The dark, heavy curtain of the occupation has finally been pierced. The boys carry the dawn with them, wading through the freezing water, bringing the beautiful, fragile promise of a new day to a world that has waited so incredibly long for the light. A grand illusion does not shatter all at once, it falls apart in quiet, heartbreaking pieces of dust settling on a cold kitchen floor. Imagine a city holding its breath in the twilight of an era. The immense, imposing buildings that were meant to stand for 1,000 years are now open to the pale, watery sky. Their roofs are gone, their massive pillars fractured, and their grand, intimidating facades have been reduced to jagged silhouettes against the horizon. The wind moves softly through these broken avenues, carrying with it a fine, pale powder. This is not the ordinary dust of a sweeping broom. It is the pulverized remnants of marble halls, of towering statues, of heavy stone eagles that once cast long, terrifying shadows over the cobblestones. It is the physical manifestation of an empire turning to ash, drifting down like snow, settling on the shoulders of the people who wander through the quiet, unrecognizable streets. To walk through this ruined city is to walk through the profound, collective sorrow of a great awakening. For years, the people who lived behind these walls were sold a magnificent, blinding story. They were told of a glorious, invincible destiny. They were enveloped in a world of perfect, marching symmetry, of sweeping music, and of endless, colorful banners that hid the cracks in the foundation. But now, the banners are torn and lying in the muddy gutters. The music has stopped entirely. And the people are left standing in the freezing rubble, staring at their own hands, realizing with a deep, hollow ache that the grand promises they were given were made entirely of air. Let us step inside a room on the ground floor of a partially ruined apartment block. Half of the ceiling has given way, opening the parlor to the gray clouds above, but the other half remains intact, shielding a small, faded velvet armchair. Sitting in this chair is an older man. His hands, worn and spotted with age, are resting quietly in his lap. He is holding a small, stamped metal pen. It is an emblem of the regime, a tiny badge of loyalty he was once told to wear upon his lapel with absolute pride. He remembers the day he pinned it to his coat. He remembers the feeling of belonging, the intoxication of feeling safe, of feeling like he was part of an unbroken, protective shield. Now, he looks at the small piece of metal, and he sees it for what it truly is. It is just a cheap piece of tin. It has no warmth. It has no soul. It cannot rebuild the bakery down the street. It cannot bring back the neighbors who vanished into the night. It cannot shelter him from the cold wind blowing through his fractured home. The sorrow that washes over him is not a loud, weeping grief. It is a quiet, devastating exhaustion. He feels the immense shame of having believed the illusion. He realizes that he traded the gentle, ordinary grace of a peaceful life for a loud, cruel mirage. With a slow, trembling breath, he opens his fingers. He lets the small metal pin slip from his palm. It falls to the floorboards with a dull, hollow clink, rolling away into a pile of plaster dust. He does not watch it fall. He simply closes his eyes and leans his head back against the velvet chair, feeling a strange, heavy relief. The lie is over. The wall has crumbled. It is terrifying to be so exposed, but for the first time in years, the air he breathes, though thick with dust, is finally true. Out in the quiet square, near the edge of a dry stone fountain, sits a boy. He is barely 16 years old. He is wearing a uniform that belongs to the youth brigades. The fabric is stiff, the dark colors designed to make him look like a miniature, unyielding soldier. For his entire childhood, this uniform was his entire world. He was raised on a diet of marching songs, of grand rallies in the summer sun, of absolute obedience to a distant, angry voice. He believed he was part of an unstoppable wave that would reshape the earth. But the wave has crashed against the rocks, and the tide is receding, leaving him stranded on the cold stone. He sits with his elbows on his knees, his chin resting in his hands, watching the older soldiers hurrying past in the shadows. They are stripping off their insignia. They are throwing their heavy iron helmets into the bushes. The invincible men he was taught to worship are simply terrified, exhausted human beings trying to disappear into the gray mist. The boy looks down at his own dark uniform. It suddenly feels incredibly heavy, like a suit of armor that is pulling him underwater. He reaches up to his throat with shaking fingers. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuttons the collar. He unbuckles the heavy leather belt with its polished brass buckle, letting it drop to the cobblestones. He slips his arms out of the rigid jacket, folding it neatly, a lingering habit of the discipline he was taught, and leaves it resting on the edge of the fountain. Underneath, he is just wearing a plain, white cotton shirt. He shivers in the cool breeze. He looks so small. He is stepping out of the myth and back into the fragile, confusing reality of being a child. From the doorway of a nearby building, a woman watches him. She is a mother whose own children are far away, lost in the sprawling chaos of the crumbling continent. She sees the boy shivering in his white shirt. She does not see a fallen soldier of the regime. She just sees a lost, frightened boy whose childhood was stolen by a beautiful, terrible lie. She steps out of the doorway. She carries a simple, woven woolen blanket. She walks softly across the quiet square, her footsteps making no sound. When she reaches the boy, she does not speak. She simply unfolds the blanket and drapes it gently over his trembling shoulders. She pulls the edges together at his chest, her hands lingering for just a moment, offering the warm, protective weight of a mother's touch. The boy looks up at her, his eyes wide, swimming with unshed tears. For his whole life, he was taught to be hard, to reject softness as a weakness. But the warmth of the blanket breaks through the rigid walls of his training. A single tear escapes, cutting a clean path through the gray dust on his cheek. He pulls the blanket tighter around himself, and the woman offers a small, sad, understanding smile before turning back to her doorway. It is a microscopic moment of healing. The grand regime is fracturing into a million pieces, but in the ruins, the simple, quiet instinct to care for one another is beginning to bloom again. As the afternoon light begins to fade, casting long, golden shadows through the broken walls, the people of the city turn to the immediate, desperate need for warmth. Let us go down into the damp, echoing cellar of an old row house. A family is gathered around a small, rusted iron stove. They have no coal. They have no firewood. The freezing dampness of the earth presses in around them. The father is kneeling before the open door of the stove. Next to him is a large, heavy stack of books. These are not novels or books of poetry. They are the grand, official volumes of the regime, printed on thick, expensive paper, embossed with gold lettering. They are filled with the speeches, the doctrines, and the faces of the men who promised them the world. The father picks up the thickest volume. He opens it, the spine cracking in the quiet cellar. He looks at the glossy photograph of a leader standing on a high balcony, looking down at a sea of adoring faces. With a slow, deliberate motion, the father grips the page and tears it from the binding. The sound of the ripping paper is surprisingly loud, a sharp, defining tear in the heavy silence. He crumples the page in his hand, tosses it into the belly of the iron stove, and strikes a match. The flame catches the edge of the paper. It blooms instantly, bright and consuming. The father feeds more pages into the fire. He tears out the manifestos, the hateful rhetoric, the grand lies, and he feeds them all to the flames. The glossy portraits bubble and warp in the heat, turning black, crumbling into weightless, fragile ash that floats up the chimney. His children sit close to the iron door, holding their freezing hands out to the fire. They bathe in the warm, orange glow. The father watches his children's faces soften in the heat. A profound, quiet irony settles over his heart. These books, which caused so much suffering, which brought the entire world to the brink of absolute ruin, are finally providing something of genuine, actual value. They are keeping his children warm for a few brief moments in the dark. He feeds the last of the heavy volumes into the stove, watching the grand illusion turn to smoke. It is a cleansing fire. As the words burn away, the invisible walls built inside their minds, the walls of suspicion, of forced obedience, of constant, terrifying vigilance, begin to crumble alongside the brick and stone above them. By the fading light of this small fire, the mother of the family sits with a stub of a pencil and the back of an old rationing envelope. She is writing a letter, though she knows it may be months before the trains run again, before a postman can carry it to her sister in a distant, quiet valley. My dearest Clara, she writes, her letters small and cramped, trying to fit the vastness of her sorrow onto the tiny scrap of paper. The city is falling apart around us. You can hear the stones shifting in the night. But the strangest thing is the silence that follows. The loudspeakers in the squares have finally stopped shouting. The men in the dark uniforms have melted away like snow. She pauses, watching the firelight dance across the damp stone wall of the cellar. I am writing this to tell you that we are safe, but my heart is so incredibly heavy, the letter continues. It is not just the loss of the buildings or the bridges. It is the realization of how deeply we were fooled. We traded our gentle, quiet lives for a magnificent, loud deception. They told us we were building a fortress that would last forever, but Clara, the bricks were made of dust. The mortar was made of fear. And now that it is falling down, we are left standing in the ruins, wondering how we ever let the shadows grow so tall. She folds the small envelope, pressing it against her heart. But Clara, she whispers to herself, adding an unspoken postscript into the dim air. Now that the walls have fallen, I can finally see the sky again. As the night fully descends over the crumbling city, the stars begin to emerge, pale and indifferent, shining down through the collapsed roofs and the open avenues. The physical destruction is overwhelming, a vast sea of shattered stone. But within the ruins, a terrifying, beautiful freedom is taking root. The suffocating weight of the grand narrative has been lifted. The people are no longer pieces on a massive, terrifying chessboard. They are just people again. They are fathers burning old lies to warm their children. They are mothers wrapping blankets around shivering, lost boys. They are quiet souls letting go of tin medals and embracing the absolute, unvarnished truth. The regime is fracturing into dust, slipping through their fingers like dry sand. But underneath the rubble, beneath the broken statues and the torn banners, the simple, resilient earth remains. It is waiting, patiently and quietly, for the people to sweep away the ashes, to find each other in the dark, and to begin the slow, gentle work of planting seeds in the scarred soil once more. When the sky becomes too heavy to bear, the final refuge of a broken world is always the deep, silent earth. Imagine walking down a long, narrow staircase made of raw, gray concrete, descending further and further away from the pale light of the sun. Above you, the city is a landscape of shattered stone and burning timber, but down here, buried beneath 50 feet of reinforced earth, the roar of the destruction is muted. It becomes a dull, rhythmic thud, like the heavy, failing heartbeat of a giant beast. This is the Chancellery bunker, the claustrophobic, subterranean fortress where the architects of a grand, terrifying illusion have retreated to hide from the reality they created. The air in these windowless corridors is incredibly heavy. It is completely unnatural. There is no breeze, no scent of rain or blooming trees. There is only the mechanical, endless drone of the diesel generators pumping recycled, stale air through tin vents. The smell is a suffocating mixture of cold sweat, stale tobacco smoke, and the sharp, metallic tang of an all-consuming fear. Walk through the narrow, brightly lit hallways. The light here is a harsh, sickly yellow that casts deep, exhausted shadows under the eyes of everyone who passes. These are the leaders, the generals, the men who once stood on high balconies and dictated the turning of the globe. But look at them now. Their magnificent, tailored uniforms hang loosely on their shrinking frames. Their hands tremble. They walk with a hurried, nervous shuffle, their eyes darting toward the thick concrete ceiling every time the earth above them shudders. In a small, cramped room at the center of this underground maze, a group of men stands around a large wooden table. Spread out beneath the harsh glare of a single desk lamp is a massive, incredibly detailed map. They are moving small, colored wooden blocks across the paper. They are speaking in urgent, hushed tones, issuing grand orders for sweeping counterattacks and glorious maneuvers. But the tragedy of this room is absolute, because the armies they are moving no longer exist. The wooden blocks represent ghost divisions, battalions of exhausted, freezing boys who vanished into the mist weeks ago. The men around the table are trapped in a labyrinth of their own delusion, desperately clinging to the paper map because it is the very last place on Earth where their empire still survives. Sitting just outside this room, at a small metal desk pushed against the concrete wall, is a young secretary. Her fingers are resting lightly on the cold, round keys of her typewriter. She is incredibly pale, her eyes wide with a quiet, terrified exhaustion. For days, she has sat in this artificial light, taking dictation from the men in the map room. She has typed out furious demands for victory, ruthless proclamations, and desperate pleas for non-existent reinforcements. She listens to the frantic voices echoing through the heavy wooden door, and a profound, quiet sorrow washes over her. She is not a fanatic. She is just a young woman from a quiet village who took a job in the city to send money home to her parents. She looks at the black ink stamped onto the crisp white paper, and she realizes the absolute, staggering absurdity of it all. The world above is turning to ash, and down here, they are still fighting a war made entirely of words. She leans her forehead against the cool metal carriage of her typewriter. She closes her eyes and tries to block out the humming of the generators. In the dark sanctuary of her mind, she begins to write her own letter, the only letter that truly matters, to her mother in the countryside. My dearest mother, she whispers in the quiet spaces of her thoughts. I do not know if the sun is shining where you are, but I have forgotten what the sky looks like. The concrete above us is so incredibly heavy. The men here are shouting, but their voices sound like ghosts echoing in an empty tomb. I am so tired, Mama. I do not care about the maps or the borders anymore. I just want to walk in the garden. I just want to feel the wind on my face. Please, keep the kitchen window open for me, so that when the silence finally comes, I will know how to find my way home. She opens her eyes, straightens her back, and rests her hands on the keys, trapped in a bunker built of pride, waiting for the inevitable end. But this is not the only place where humanity has been driven underground. Miles away from the Chancellery, beneath the shattered boulevards and the ruined squares, the true, enduring heart of the city is also hiding in the dark. Let us travel through the cold, damp earth and step onto the platform of a subterranean subway tunnel. The contrast is immediate and breathtaking. There are no harsh, electric lights here. There are no maps, no mahogany tables, no grand delusions. There is only the absolute, overwhelming reality of survival. The curved, tiled walls of the tunnel stretch out into the darkness, weeping with thick trails of condensation. The tracks, where the bright, humming trains used to carry people to work and to the parks, are now entirely covered with wooden planks and scattered straw. And upon this makeshift floor, sitting shoulder to shoulder, thousands upon thousands of weary citizens are gathered. The air is freezing, and it smells of wet wool, damp earth, and unwashed bodies. It is an ocean of exhausted humanity. Mothers holding their infants. Grandparents wrapped in frayed blankets. Wounded soldiers who have simply stopped walking, sitting quietly beside the people they were meant to protect. When the heavy artillery strikes the earth above, the sound down here is deafening. The entire tunnel vibrates violently. The ceramic tiles rattle against the concrete, and a fine, gray dust sifts down from the vaulted ceiling, settling over the sea of huddled figures like a ghostly snow. In the dim, flickering light of a few hoarded candles, you can see the profound, beautiful grace of ordinary people enduring the unimaginable. Sitting near the edge of the platform, leaning against a cold steel pillar, is an older man named Arthur. He is wearing a heavy winter coat that is covered in plaster dust. Sitting on his lap, wrapped entirely in his thick woolen scarf, is a little girl. She is not his granddaughter. She is a child he found wandering in the rubble 2 days ago, separated from her family in the chaos. When the earth violently shudders above them, the little girl squeezes her eyes shut and buries her face into Arthur's chest, trembling like a fragile leaf in a winter storm. Arthur does not look up at the ceiling. He focuses entirely on the small, frightened child in his arms. He brings his large, rough hands up and gently cups them over her ears, pressing them softly against her head to muffle the terrifying roar of the bombs. He leans his head down, resting his cheek against her dusty hair, and he begins to hum. He hums a low, resonant, incredibly soothing melody. It is an old folk song, a song about a quiet river and a sleeping forest. The vibration of his chest transfers to her small body, a warm, steady rhythm that fights back against the violent shaking of the world. He holds her, a stranger who has become his entire universe in the dark, offering her the only shelter he possesses, the absolute, unconditional warmth of his own humanity. A few yards down the platform, a young woman is moving slowly through the tightly packed crowd. She carries a small, battered tin thermos. She steps carefully over sleeping children and outstretched legs, offering a small metal cup of thin, lukewarm tea to anyone who looks like they might fade away into the cold. She has almost nothing left to give, but she pours the tea with the careful, reverent grace of a priestess offering a sacrament. She hands the cup to a wounded boy sitting against the wall. He takes it with a trembling hand, their fingers brushing in the dark. "Drink slowly," she whispers, her voice a soft, gentle breeze in the stagnant air. "It will warm you. Just hold on a little longer." He nods, his eyes filled with a quiet, unspeakable gratitude. It is just water and a few withered tea leaves, but in this terrifying, subterranean purgatory, it is a profoundly beautiful act of love. It is the stubborn, unbreakable instinct to care for one another when everything else has been stripped away. This is the agonizing, beautiful contrast of the city's final days. In the bunker, beneath the gardens, the leadership is pacing in the harsh artificial light, furious that the world has refused to bend to their will. They are waiting for a miracle, a phantom army to rise from the dust and save their shattered pride. They are terrified of losing their power. But down in the damp, freezing subway tunnels, the people do not care about power. They do not care about the slogans, the uniforms, or the glorious 1,000-year promises that brought the fire down upon their homes. They are waiting for something far simpler and far more profound. A mother sitting on a wooden suitcase looks down at the tracks. She remembers what it felt like to walk to the bakery in the morning sun. She remembers the sound of birds singing in the linden trees. She longs for the smell of clean laundry drying on a line in the afternoon breeze. The people in the dark are not waiting for a victory. They are simply, desperately waiting for the guns to fall silent. They are waiting for the moment when they can finally unclench their jaws, stop bracing their shoulders against the falling dust, and simply breathe. They are dreaming of a morning where the air is still, where the sky is quiet, and where they can slowly push open the heavy iron grates, step out of the shadows, and feel the gentle warmth of the sun on their faces once more. As the night stretches on, the bombing above begins to slow, fading into an exhausted, sporadic rhythm. The people in the tunnels lean against each other, their breathing sinking together into a soft, collective sigh. The echoes in the Chancellery grow fainter, the grand illusions finally dissolving into the concrete walls. And deep in the earth, the ordinary, beautifully resilient souls simply hold each other's hands in the dark, keeping the fragile spark of their humanity alive, waiting patiently for the long, terrible night to finally break into dawn. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a great and terrible storm, a stillness so profound it feels almost like a physical weight lifting from the chest. Imagine the very first morning when the guns finally, entirely, stopped. For years, the air had been a violently vibrating thing, filled with the shrieking of sirens, the heavy, rhythmic thud of marching boots, and the earth-shattering roar of destruction. The people of the city had forgotten what the world sounded like when it was at peace. They had learned to live in the spaces between the explosions, shrinking themselves down into the dark, damp cellars, waiting for an end they were never quite sure would come. And then, one morning, the dawn arrives, and it brings with it nothing but the light. Let us stand near the heavy iron grate of a subterranean shelter. For hours, the people below have been sitting in the dark, listening. They are waiting for the sirens to wail the all clear, but the sirens themselves have been broken. The only sound is the slow, steady dripping of water from a cracked pipe. Finally, an older man, his coat gray with weeks of accumulated dust, slowly stands up. He walks to the iron stairs. His hands tremble as he reaches up and pushes against the heavy metal grate. It groans, a harsh, screeching sound of rusted iron, and it slowly swings open. The light that spills down into the dark is blinding. It is the pure, unfiltered, golden light of early May. The people in the cellar raise their hands to shield their eyes, squinting against the brilliance. They move slowly, hesitantly, climbing the stairs one by one, like a gentle migration of ghosts returning to the world of the living. When they step out onto the street, the breath catches in their throats. The city they knew is entirely gone. The grand avenues are mountains of shattered brick and twisted steel. The air smells of pulverized plaster, damp earth, and charred wood. But there is another scent woven into the ruin, a scent so delicate and forgotten that it brings sudden, unbidden tears to their eyes. It is the smell of the spring wind. It is the scent of wet soil warming in the sun, of a world that is quietly, stubbornly trying to bloom. Watch a woman as she steps onto the broken pavement. Her name is Martha. She is holding her young son by the hand. For his entire life, this boy has only known a world of fear, of looking up at the sky with terror. Martha looks up now. The sky is a vast, uninterrupted canopy of pale, perfect blue. There are no dark shapes moving across the clouds. There is no smoke staining the horizon. It is just a sky. She takes a breath. It is a slow, trembling intake of air. For the first time in years, she does not have to brace herself for a shockwave. She does not have to calculate the distance of a falling shell. She breathes in, and the air simply fills her lungs, clean and cool. She exhales, and a lifetime of tension, woven tightly into her shoulders and her jaw, begins to miraculously unravel. She drops to her knees in the gray dust, pulls her son into her arms, and buries her face in his neck, weeping with a profound, overwhelming relief. But this peace is incredibly fragile. The silence is so new, so sudden, that it feels almost dangerous. The survivors walk through the rubble with soft, careful footsteps, as if speaking too loudly or stepping too heavily might wake the sleeping monster of the war. They wander through the unrecognizable streets, looking for the landmarks of their past lives. A man stands at a corner, turning in a slow circle, trying to find the place where his bakery used to be. There is nothing left but a partial brick wall and a twisted iron radiator. He walks over to the rubble, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He does not weep. The sorrow is too vast, too bottomless for tears. He simply stands there, grappling with the impossible reality that he has survived, but his entire world has not. This is the heavy, agonizing duality of the first day of peace. The adrenaline that kept them alive in the dark has finally faded, and in its place comes the crushing, immense weight of grief. They are alive, but they are looking at the empty spaces beside them, the spaces where their husbands, their brothers, and their daughters used to stand. Yet, even in the absolute center of this devastation, the gentle, beautiful instinct of humanity begins to quietly reassert itself. On a street completely covered in debris, an elderly woman is walking with a small, chipped porcelain cup. She has found a broken pipe where clear water is bubbling up from the earth, forming a small, sparkling pool in the ruins. She fills her cup. She turns and sees a young soldier sitting on a piece of fallen masonry. He is wearing a uniform that is torn and covered in mud. His helmet is gone. His rifle is nowhere to be seen. He is just a boy, sitting with his head in his hands, utterly defeated and profoundly exhausted. The old woman does not see an enemy, nor does she see a failed conqueror. She sees a child who is thirsty. She walks over to him, her footsteps soft on the dust. She reaches out and gently touches his shoulder. He flinches, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. She does not speak. She simply holds out the porcelain cup. The boy looks at the water. It catches the spring sunlight, shimmering like liquid glass. His hands shake as he takes the cup from her. He brings it to his lips and drinks. It is the coldest, sweetest water he has ever tasted. It is a baptism of kindness. He lowers the cup, looks at the old woman, and a single, silent tear tracks a clean line through the grime on his cheek. She offers a tiny, microscopic smile, takes the empty cup, and walks back to the broken pipe. It is a quiet, everyday heroism, the simple, radical act of choosing compassion in a world that has spent years teaching them to hate. As the sun climbs higher, warming the broken stones, people begin to emerge from the isolation of their own survival. They gather in the squares, forming small, quiet clusters. They do not cheer. They do not celebrate. They simply seek the warmth of another human presence. They share whatever they have left. A man offers a sliver of hard cheese to a neighbor. A woman uses her own clean handkerchief to wipe the soot from a stranger's face. They are rebuilding society not with bricks or grand speeches, but with these tiny, gentle gestures of mutual care. In the late afternoon, the silence of the city is broken by a sound so beautiful, so incredibly ordinary, that it makes people stop dead in their tracks. From somewhere high up in the skeletal remains of a ruined church tower, a single bird begins to sing. It is a clear, melodic, trilling song that echoes across the jagged rooftops. For years, the birds had been driven away by the fire and the noise. Now, this tiny creature has returned, perching on a blackened beam, pouring its heart out into the quiet spring air. People stand in the streets, looking up, their faces bathed in the golden light, just listening. The birdsong is a promise. It is the earth whispering that the winter is over, that the poison is washing away, and that life, stubborn and miraculous, will find a way to return. Sitting on a salvaged wooden crate in the center of what used to be a bustling living room, a young woman named Elara rests a piece of paper on her knee. She has a pencil, worn down to a tiny stub. She is writing a letter to her husband, who was taken to a prison camp years ago. She does not know if he is alive. She does not know where to send the letter. But the absolute need to speak to him, to cast a lion of hope out into the world, is overwhelming. My dearest love, she writes, her handwriting flowing smoothly in the warm air. I am sitting in the sun. I cannot believe it, but I am sitting in the sun, and the guns are quiet. The city is broken, my love. There is almost nothing left of the streets we used to walk. But I am still here. I am breathing. She pauses, looking at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight that falls across her lap. The silence is so loud today, the letter continues. It hurts my ears, and it hurts my heart, because now that the noise has stopped, I have the time to realize how incredibly much I miss you. But I saw a green shoot pushing up through the cobblestones this morning. A tiny, brave little plant. The spring is coming, my darling. The nightmare has finally broken. I will wait for you here, by the old stone bridge, every single day until you walk back into my arms. Please, come back to the light. She folds the paper, tucking it safely into her pocket, holding onto the fragile, beautiful hope that somewhere, he is sitting in the same sunlight, looking toward the horizon. As the day slowly gives way to evening, the true, profound nature of the peace finally settles over the survivors. The sunset is magnificent, painting the sky in deep shades of violet, rose, and gold. For the first time in an eternity, the mothers do not rush to pull heavy blackout curtains across the windows. There are no windows left to cover, and there is no longer any need to hide. They let the evening light spill into their ruined homes. When the night falls, the stars emerge. They are brilliant, piercing points of silver light. The people look up at them without fear. They are no longer bombers' moans. They are no longer terrifying omens. They are just stars, ancient and peaceful, watching over a wounded earth. The people prepare for sleep. They lie down on salvaged mattresses, on folded blankets, or simply on piles of soft straw. And for the first time in years, they take off their heavy shoes. They unbutton their thick coats. They loosen their clothes. They do not need to be ready to run in the dark. A father lies on a blanket next to his sleeping daughter. He listens to the incredibly quiet rhythm of her breathing. He reaches out and gently rests his hand on her back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall. He closes his eyes, and a deep, true exhaustion washes over him, not the frantic, terrifying exhaustion of survival, but the heavy, peaceful weariness of a man who knows he can finally close his eyes and simply rest. The war has taken almost everything from them. It has taken their homes, their innocence, and so many of the people they loved. The grief they carry is a mountain they will have to climb for the rest of their lives. But as the first gentle breath of the spring wind blows through the ruins, rustling the torn wallpaper and cooling the warm stones, a quiet, unshakable resilience takes root in the dark. The grand, cruel illusions have all turned to dust, but the gentle, enduring truth of the human heart remains entirely unbroken. They have survived the long, terrible night. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, they will begin the slow, beautiful, heartbreaking work of planting seeds in the scarred earth, tending to the fragile dawn, and learning how to live in the light once more. A forest fire does not have the final word. The green shoot pushing through the black ash always writes the ending. Imagine the earth just after the great, terrible storm has finally passed. The landscape is deeply, profoundly scarred. There are vast, jagged craters carved into the soft soil, and the skeletal remains of great cities cast long, jagged shadows in the pale light of the dawn. The air is entirely still, drained of the chaotic, violent noise that had gripped the world for so many long, agonizing years. It is a quiet that feels incredibly heavy at first, a stunned, breathless silence, as if the whole world is afraid that exhaling too deeply might wake the sleeping thunder. But if you kneel down and press your hand against this broken, battered earth, you will feel something miraculous. You will feel the slow, steady, stubborn pulse of life. The world has been fractured, but the roots beneath the soil remain entirely unbroken. They are waiting in the dark, gathering their strength, preparing for the slow, quiet, beautiful work of reaching for the light once more. Healing does not begin with grand parades or sweeping declarations. It begins with the simplest, most intimate of movements. It begins with the hands. Look down a ruined avenue, where the cobblestones are buried beneath a mountain of fallen brick and gray plaster. There is no heavy machinery here, no towering cranes to lift the wreckage. There are only the people. A long line of women stands amidst the ruins, forming a human chain that stretches from the center of the debris all the way to the cleared edge of the street. They are wearing faded dresses, their heads wrapped in worn scarves to keep the thick, pale dust from their hair. Their hands are raw, covered in the gray ash of the past. But watch the way they move. They bend down, pick up a single, unbroken red brick from the rubble, and pass it to the woman standing next to them. Turn, reach, pass. It is a slow, rhythmic, mesmerizing choreography. They do not speak much. They simply pass the heavy stones, one by one, hour after hour. With every brick they clean and stack, they are doing something far more profound than just clearing a street. They are slowly, methodically lifting the crushing weight of history off their own shoulders. They are reclaiming their home, inch by quiet inch. Sometimes, amidst the gray ruin, the hands find something extraordinarily precious. A woman digging through the plaster suddenly stops. She brushes the dust away with trembling fingers and uncovers a small, intact porcelain saucer. It has a delicate pattern of tiny blue cornflowers painted around the edge. It is a completely ordinary object, but in the center of this devastation, it is a breathtaking treasure. She wipes it clean on her apron and holds it gently against her chest. It is a fragment of the world before the darkness, a tiny, fragile piece of beauty that somehow survived the fire. She takes it home to her salvaged room, places it on a wooden windowsill, and lets it catch the morning sun. It is a promise that beauty can, and will, exist again. As the streets are slowly swept clean, the fractured pieces of the human heart also begin the long, agonizing journey toward home. Imagine a sprawling railway station in the late autumn. The high glass ceiling is gone, leaving the platforms open to the gray, weeping sky. The platform is crowded with a sea of people, standing shoulder to shoulder in the damp chill. They are all holding pieces of cardboard with names written in dark charcoal, or small, creased photographs with frayed edges. They are waiting for the trains carrying the missing. The steam engine arrives with a slow, heavy sigh, billowing white clouds into the cool air. The doors open, and weary, hollow-eyed men and women step down onto the concrete. The silence on the platform is absolute as the crowd searches the faces of the arrivals. And then, a small gasp breaks the quiet. A woman drops her cardboard sign. It flutters to the wet ground. She runs forward, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, and throws her arms around a man in a tattered, oversized coat. He drops his canvas bag and buries his face in her shoulder. They do not say a word. They simply sink to their knees, holding onto one another with a desperate, crushing grip, as if letting go might cause the other to vanish into the mist. It is the purest, most concentrated joy a human heart can hold, a joy born entirely from the depths of profound sorrow. But for every embrace on the platform, there are dozens of people who stand perfectly still, watching the train empty until there is no one left. They slowly lower their cardboard signs. They tuck the faded photographs back into the deep pockets of their coats. Their loved ones have not returned, and the terrible, gnawing uncertainty settles back into their bones. Yet, watch how they carry this unbearable grief. They do not collapse. They turn up their collars against the damp wind and begin the long, quiet walk home. When they reach their empty rooms, they do not surrender to the dark. They set an extra place at the small wooden dining table. They light a single candle and place it near the window. They carry the memory of those who were lost like a sacred, glowing ember, guarding it fiercely against the wind. They realize that to remember the missing with pure, unwavering love is the most profound act of defiance against a regime that tried to erase them. Memory becomes their sanctuary, a beautiful, invisible monument built entirely of devotion. This necessity of memory is the very soil from which the new world must grow. If we forget the depth of the winter, we will never truly understand the absolute miracle of the spring. In a quiet room on the second floor of a rebuilt apartment block, a grandfather sits at a small wooden desk. The room is bathed in the warm, golden light of an oil lamp. In the corner, sleeping peacefully in a woven wicker basket, is his newborn grandson. The baby's chest rises and falls with a soft, rhythmic perfection. The old man dips a steel pen into a bottle of dark blue ink. He is writing a letter that he will seal in an envelope, meant to be opened by the child many years from now, when the boy is old enough to understand the scars on the earth. "My beautiful, sleeping boy," the grandfather writes, his hand trembling slightly, the nib scratching a gentle lullaby onto the thick paper. "You are breathing in a world that is finally quiet." But the quiet was bought at a terrible, unimaginable price. I am writing this to you because I will not be here to tell you the story myself, and there is a truth you must carry in your heart. He pauses, looking over at the sleeping infant. He listens to the soft rain tapping against the glass of the window pane. "Many years ago, we allowed a great shadow to fall over our home," the letter continues, the words flowing with a profound, sorrowful honesty. "We forgot how to listen to the gentle voices, and we let ourselves be mesmerized by the loud, angry ones. We let our fear build high walls between us and our neighbors. We looked the other way when the streetlights faded, and we allowed the illusion of grandeur to replace the simple, beautiful grace of human kindness. We walked into the dark, my child, because we forgot how to protect the light." The grandfather sets his pen down and rubs his tired eyes. He reaches out and gently touches the soft, warm blanket covering the child, drawing strength from the innocent, fragile new life. "But you must also know this," he resumes writing. "Even in the absolute blackest of nights, the human spirit refused to completely surrender. I saw people share their last crumb of bread. I saw mothers shield strangers. I saw ordinary men and women whisper truth in the damp cellars, risking everything to keep a tiny spark alive. You come from a world that was broken, yes. But you also come from a people who remembered how to love in the dark. Carry that love with you. Never take the sunlight for granted. Defend the fragile, gentle things of this earth, and never let the loud voices convince you to close your heart." He folds the letter carefully, pressing the crease flat with his thumb, sealing a legacy of hard-won wisdom, profound sorrow, and endless, stubborn hope into the paper. It is a map left behind for the future, a guide to walking safely through the world. As the years slowly turn, the earth itself begins to mirror this quiet, miraculous healing. Nature is the great forgiver, an endless, patient force that knows exactly how to bind a wound. Visit the places where the battles were once the fiercest. The massive, terrifying concrete bunkers that once bristled with iron and hostility have not been removed, but they have been entirely transformed. The heavy gray walls have been swallowed by thick, creeping vines of dark green ivy. Soft, green moss carpets the floors where heavy boots once marched. The deep craters left by the falling bombs have filled with rainwater, turning into quiet, reflective ponds where dragonflies hover in the summer heat. Walk through the open meadows. The rusted coils of barbed wire that once divided the fields have been claimed by wild climbing roses. The sharp, cruel iron thorns are completely hidden beneath a blanket of soft, fragrant pink and white petals. The earth has taken the instruments of pain and woven them seamlessly into a tapestry of life. If you listen closely, the wind blowing through these meadows no longer carries the echo of the sirens or the sorrowful sigh of the ruins. It carries the bright, unspotted, cascading laughter of children. They are running through the tall grass, playing hide-and-seek behind the moss-covered concrete, completely untouched by the shadows of the past. They are the living, breathing manifestation of the spring. The history of this dark era is not a story of monsters and myths, it is a profoundly human story. It is a terrifying testament to how easily our hearts can be led into the shadows when we are afraid, when we are exhausted, and when we forget our shared humanity. But it is also a breathtaking, enduring testament to the absolute resilience of the human soul. We can be broken. We can be stripped of our homes, our names, and our certainties. But somewhere, deep in the absolute core of our being, there is a tiny, inextinguishable flicker of light. It is the instinct to reach out and hold another's hand in the dark. It is the instinct to share the warmth. It is the profound, beautiful urge to survive, not just as solitary creatures, but as a family bound together by empathy. As the night draws to a close, and the stars begin to fade into the soft, purple twilight of a new morning, let this quiet reflection settle over you like a warm, heavy blanket. The scars upon the earth, and the scars upon the heart, will always remain. They are the intricate, etched maps of where we have been, a reminder of the price of the peace we now hold. We do not erase them. We simply trace our fingers over them, honor the immense sorrow they represent, and then turn our faces toward the sun. The roots are deep. The soil is rich. The winter has passed. Close your eyes now, and let the quiet, gentle rhythm of your own breathing match the slow, eternal breathing of the earth. You are safe. The storm is over. The dawn is here. Let the beautiful, enduring light of the human spirit wrap around you, carrying you softly into a deep, peaceful, and unbroken rest.